Chapter 2441 War. More and more cultivators gradually appeared on the outskirts of Six Desires Mountains. They watched the horrifying scene that covered the entire Divine Mountain from a distance away as their hearts trembled violently. These people were all cultivators from Six Desires Heaven. The commotion on the Divine Mountain shocked the Renhuangs. Many of them rushed over here, and they witnessed this battle. What was happening? The hearts of many people quavered. Their gazes were dead fixed on the battle. They felt as though the sky was collapsing and the earth would be split apart. "The Divine Mountain is about to crumble," someone said. The Divine Mountain, which floated in the sky, cracked and broke into pieces. The pieces plummeted down and became ruins. The highest holy land that towered in Six Desires Heaven had been flattened during the battle. Rumor has it that the Lord confined an extraordinary cultivator who possessed a divine body. Lord Yemal, Lord Liberty, and Lord Initial Zen rushed over to the Six Desires Heavenly Palace upon hearing the news. "Most likely, they are attacking Lord Six Desires," someone said. The cultivators could not see what was happening on the Divine Mountain. The region was sealed off by a domain of the Great Path. The independent space overflowed with destructive power. After a period of time, the sound of an explosion could be heard. A terrifying storm stirred up and spread toward the surroundings. "Retreat quickly!" The facial expression of the cultivators changed drastically as they nimbly retreated backward. The storm swept over them, and many of them were sent flying by the shockwaves. They spat out mouthfuls of blood. Even though they had tried to keep far away from the sealed-off domain of the Great Path, they were still affected by the residue shockwaves of the battle. However, even after the cultivators regained their composure, they did not take their eyes away from the battlefield. All of them were eager to witness the war that was happening inside the domain. The Divine Mountain no longer existed. It had fallen apart during the battle and was completely destroyed. This caused everyone's hearts to skip a beat. Had the Six Desires Heavenly Palace been reduced to ruins just like that? A top force such as the Six Desires Heavenly Palace occupied a vast territory in the Divine Mountain. Its size was akin to that of a town. However, it had been flattened in the blink of an eye. One could imagine how vicious the battle was. Most likely many members of the Six Desires Heavenly Palace had perished. In the center of the battlefield, there were 4 cultivators standing. The cultivator who stood in the middle unleashed his aura without restraint. His killing intent was burning. His eyes were ablaze with rage. The cultivator was none other than Lord Six Desires. As for the other 3 powerful cultivators, they actually surrounded Lord Six Desires. They stood at 3 points around him. Each of them released astonishing might that pressed down on him. The battle had already reached this point. The Six Desires Heavenly Palace had also been annihilated. Many cultivators of the Six Desires Heavenly Palace had been killed. Things had already escalated to this point. It was impossible to want to make peace now. If they let Lord Six Desires escape, he would be a huge liability. Right now, rage fumed inside Lord Six Desires. He naturally knew what these 3 cultivators wanted to do. The other party had gone all out to eradicate him. They wanted to eliminate him here to prevent future trouble. Buzz. The wind and clouds in the sky churned angrily. The Great Path was howling. Divine halos shone. An illusory figure of the God of Liberty appeared, shielding the sun and towering over everything else. It enveloped the vast space as though the entire region had transformed into the domain of liberty. When the god put his palms together to form a seal, 108,000 gigantic palms materialized in the sky above. The palms stacked together, and it was an impressive sight to behold. "Lord Six Desires, you can only blame yourself for being ignorant of the current state of affairs," said Lord Liberty. Then 108,000 gigantic palms plummeted all at once. The space was on the verge of collapsing as it shook frenziedly. The palms overwhelmed the sky as they blasted towards Lord Six Desires. Rumble. A golden light screen once again appeared around Lord Six Desires. It seemed to be his domain. The golden light screen turned into an absolute region that contained a terrifying golden storm. Countless golden lightning flashed amidst the raging gale. When the palms of Lord Liberty approached Lord Six Desires, he raised his head and bellowed as he glared at the other party. Instead of shattering into pieces, the golden screen expanded toward the surroundings instantly. It was as though an explosion had occurred. An alarming golden storm swept across the sky. The scene was akin to a real divine tribulation. The storm charged toward the 108,000 gigantic palms. Everywhere the storm passed, the palms were instantly sliced and crushed. It was as though no other power of the great path could coexist with the storm. Buzz! The destructive golden storm scoured the battlefield and expanded outward, trapping all three major cultivators in it. This caused the entire space to become the domain of Lord Six Desires. When faced with such a horrifying storm, even Lord Liberty had to take a few steps back. "It looks like he has gone mad," commented Lord Yi as he looked at the scene below. Endless divine light shot out from the body of Lord Six Desires. Every beam of divine light was connected with the light screen, demonstrating his dominance over his domain. When Lord Yi and the others saw this, they understood that Lord Six Desires was using all his power to resist their attacks. He had become one with his domain. This was a trick that was unique to the cultivators who had survived the divine tribulations of the Great Path. However, once his domain was destroyed, Lord Six Desires would suffer painful consequences. The mildest outcome would damage his Great Path. His cultivation might be lowered due to it. Of course, he would most likely perish here if he didn't make it out alive. Therefore, he couldn't be concerned with other matters such as his cultivation. Rumble. Yet another frightening sound thundered. Lord Yi had attacked. A destructive black hole appeared in the sky above. From within it, a halberd materialized. It directly pierced the space and charged toward where Lord Six Desires was. As the halberd blasted down, a myriad of halberd shadows flashed. All the halberd shadows slashed downward simultaneously. The violent light of catastrophe destroyed everything in its path. However, right at this moment, the golden divine lights, which connected Lord Six Desires and the sky, took the form of divine trees. Vines and leaves sprouted out and wrapped around the halberds. Countless halberds were blocked. Only the strongest halberd that split the sky cleaved through the golden branches and continued crashing down toward Lord Six Desires. When he saw this attack coming, Lord Six Desires seemed to become divine light. Countless bolts of golden lightning burst forth and shot up toward the halberd that was crashing down. Lord Six Desires pointed at the sky, and his body collided with the halberd. The halberd was formed from the Great Path, and his body was similarly formed from a powerful way. When his finger and the halberd clashed, Lord Six Desires' figure also appeared beneath the halberd. The destructive storm grew stronger and swept out toward the surrounding regions. The cultivators from the outside world saw countless destructive beams of golden light of catastrophe sweeping out all around them. No one could withstand such terrifying aftershocks. "Lord Six Desires, you have run out of luck," said Lord Yi. Lord Initial Zen had yet to attack. Among the three of them, Lord Initial Zen was still in peak condition right now. Lord Six Desires would not walk away from this battle alive. On the battlefield, Yi Futian was also present. Divine light circled around him, preventing his body from being destroyed. Around him, the faint light of Buddha appeared. He revealed a strange look as he glanced at Lord Initial Zen in the distance. Even now, Lord Initial Zen still remembered to protect Yi Futian? Things were not going well for Lord Six Desires. Chapter 2442, Mutual Betrayal. Lord Liberty and Lord Yi unleashed even greater power of the Great Path. The illusory figure of the god which stood behind Lord Liberty sent out another palm strike. The gigantic palm crushed the heavens. Dull rumbling sounds thundered. It was as though the sky was collapsing. Far away, on the ground of the region where the attack was sent out, gigantic palm marks appeared. The ground sank. The scene was shocking to behold. If anyone were standing in that region, they would have been crushed to death. Lord Yi did not stop attacking either. The destructive storm intensified. Halberds surged into Lord Six Desires' domain of the Great Path, intending to pierce his body. Under the ferocious attacks of two great cultivators, Lord Six Desires could no longer escape unscathed. "You bullies have gone too far," barked Lord Six Desires coldly. As he said this, his body turned into a body of the great path. Divine light dazzled around him. It was as though his body was no longer made of flesh. Instead, it was made of the way. His body was translucent, and golden divine light radiated from within it. His body expanded quickly. As Lord Six Desires grew larger, his body resonated with his domain in the sky. "Since you have acted so presumptuously, pay the price for your actions." Lord Six Desires uttered these words coldly. A beam of divine light shot up to the heavens and swept across space. The next moment, an unparalleled divine halo burst forth from Lord Six Desires' body. An enormous illusory figure, which was akin to a god, appeared and merged with the domain. The presence of the god could be sensed in every corner of this space. Golden destructive vines and leaves extended outwards and enshrouded the space. Lord Liberty and Lord Yu were also swathed by vines and leaves. Their facial expressions turned somewhat ugly as they looked at Lord Six Desires. This fellow had gone berserk. The destructive divine light invaded where they stood. The branches that spread out curled towards them, even towards the gigantic divine illusory figure. They seemed to want to consume them in this domain of the great path. "Lord Initial Zen, destroy his original body," said Lord Yi. They clashed directly with Lord Six Desires and were now restraining each other. It was difficult for them to pull themselves away. Only Lord Initial Zen was still in peak condition and was not entangled in Lord Six Desires' attack. He could still make his move. Lord Six Desires had already gone mad. He was attacking them without restraint. All his attacks were mutually destructive. If Lord Initial Zen were to attack now, he only needed to attack Lord Six Desires' original body and shatter it to kill him. Their chances of victory were extremely high. After all, they were three lords joining forces. It would not be a surprise for them to be able to kill Lord Six Desires. It was now time for the decisive victory. Lord Initial Zen's body shone with divine light. The golden light of Buddha was dazzling. An astonishing pressure was faintly emanating from him. However, he stood there motionlessly, seemingly having no intention of attacking. This scene stunned Lord Yi and Lord Liberty. "Lord Initial Zen, what are you waiting for? Kill him to prevent future trouble," Lord Liberty shouted. Lord Six Desires' attack of the Great Path had already entangled his divine illusory figure. The destructive light of the catastrophe that was at its peak was spreading towards him. This was the best time to kill Lord Six Desires. If Lord Initial Zen did not attack him now, the two lords might be in trouble. Lord Six Desires already disregarded all consequences. However, after hearing Lord Liberty's words, Lord Initial Zen still showed no signs of wanting to attack. He just stood there. This caused Lord Liberty and Lord Yi to feel uneasy. Their facial expressions suddenly became exceptionally ugly. They clearly realized what was going on. Lord Initial Zen did not intend to attack. He was doing this intentionally. No wonder Lord Initial Zen had not truly attacked all this while. He had actually intentionally done so to backstab them. If the three of them were all gravely injured, who would swoop in to reap the benefits? Lord Initial Zen was also from a Buddhist sect and was in the same sect as Saint Shinchan. Even if Lord Six Desires escaped, among the three of them, the one who worried the least about Lord Six Desires seeking revenge against him was also Lord Initial Zen. When they thought of this, the two of them felt regret for being so careless. They initially thought that there would be no issues with the three of them joining forces to kill Lord Six Desires. Yet, they never imagined that Lord Initial Zen would actually stab them in the back at a time like this. "Lord Six Desires, why don't we all stop attacking at the same time?" Lord Yi suggested decisively. Since Lord Initial Zen betrayed him and Lord Liberty, then he would give up. He would rather forsake the mission than let Lord Initial Zen's scheme come to fruition. "All right. Both of you stop first," said Lord Six Desires. Lord Yi was hesitant to stop attacking first, but Lord Six Desires was in a state of self-defense. Unless Lord Yi and Lord Liberty ceased attacking, it was impossible for the latter to remove his domain first. Lord Six Desire's request was founded. Lord Yi communicated with Lord Liberty through transmitted thought. Then, the power of the great path exerted by the two of them gradually lessened. They seemed to be withdrawing their attacks slowly. When Lord Six Desires sensed this, he stopped attacking them too. However, he did not retract his domain. Right at this moment, an overwhelming might suddenly burst forth. Endless golden lights of catastrophe pierced the space and charged towards Lord Liberty and Lord Yi. At the same time, Lord Yi and Lord Liberty also let out a roar. Their bodies transformed into Wei, destroying everything that came in their path. Both parties actually happened to launch an attack at the same time. Clearly, they were wary of the other party and had no intention of giving up the battle at all. They intended to first lower the guard of the other party before they struck a killing blow. After they experienced the betrayal of Lord Initial Zen, how could they possibly trust each other? All three of them plotted to strike and kill the other party first. Standing at the side, Lord Initial Zen quietly observed everything that was happening. The three strong cultivators delivered their strongest blows simultaneously. Destructive divine light spread out, forming a halo in the sky. The ring expanded outwards towards the vast space. Far away from the battlefield, many cultivators on the ground saw the destructive halo. They could sense the menacing auras brewing all the way on the battlefield. Their hearts trembled violently. How scary was that blow! Futian's body was protected by the light of Buddha, but he was still sent flying backward by the shockwave. His divine body shook, and he was pushed back a great distance. He was no longer in the region where the Six Desires' heavenly palace used to be. After the destructive divine light dissipated, when Futian looked over in their direction once again, Lord Liberty, Lord Yi as well as Lord Six Desires appeared in 3 different locations. All 3 of them were gravely injured. Powerful figures such as Lord Liberty and Lord Yi were actually dyed red in blood. Their auras were weak. Golden destructive divine light circled around their bodies. It seemed that it was still destroying their bodies and spiritual souls. They had suffered severe injuries. Of course, Lord Six Desires was equally injured. Right now, he was extremely frail. His current aura paled in comparison with his aura at peak condition. His body was slightly bent over, and he was not standing straight. Blood oozed out from the corner of his mouth. His spiritual soul was damaged, and his ability was drastically weakened. When Futian saw this scene, his heart stirred. He did not know how much of Lord Six Desire's ability was left. However, he had paid the price. Currently, among the 4 powerful cultivators, only Lord Initial Zen was still at peak condition. He had been observing on the sidelines and had not participated in the battle. After the destructive light halo dissipated, he stood amidst the light of Buddha. The golden light of Buddha shone and was dazzling beyond comparison. At the moment, Lord Initial Zen would be the person to decide everything. Chapter 2443 Fight to the Death. Lord Initial Zen clasped his hands together and evoked the name of Buddha. The sound of Buddha reverberated and resounded throughout the void as the golden light of Buddha shrouded the infinite space. In an instant, the light of Buddha was shining all over this world. Land within a radius of thousands of miles was under this light. A golden light screen appeared between heaven and earth, as if setting up a domain of its own. Lord Initial Zen, who had not made a move until now, finally took action. For a time, the other 3 lords felt a coldness growing inside of them. Lord Yi was the most powerful person in Yemo Heaven, and Lord Liberty, too, was the most powerful figure of Liberty Heaven. They were both high and mighty existences that reigned above all living beings. However, at this moment, they felt nothing but remorse. If they had been more cautious, perhaps all this could be avoided. Everything they had done had paved the way for one man. Now, Lord Initial Zen was in a position to do whatever he wanted. Who else could stop him? Lord Six Desires was full of hatred, but there was some satisfaction as well. He felt the pleasure of taking revenge against Lord Yi and Lord Liberty. Both of them were in the same position as he. Initial Zen, you and I have never had any grievances. I can let go of all that had happened today, and you can have Futian as well as the divine body. I will leave here and forget everything that happened. In the future, I will not do anything. With your strength and connections, you have no need to care about the likes of me. Lord Six's desire, admittedly, had been impulsive before. But now that he was grievously injured, he calmed down, and his instinct to survive kicked in. The hope was to leave here alive. As long as he could leave here, then there was still hope for everything. Lord Initial Zen glanced at him, still surrounded by the light of Buddha. As he drifted forward, he had a peaceful smile at the corner of his mouth. There are indeed no grievances between you and me, he said. However, since the matter has escalated to this point, why would I let you go? Such benevolent voice sent Lord Six's desires chills up and down his spine. When he looked at Lord Initial Zen, a faint sense of panic now filled his heart. Could Initial Zen be so ruthless that he really wanted to end him today? Lord Initial Zen was different from Lord Liberty and Lord Yi. He had an extensive background and had no fear regarding retribution. Even Saint Jinchan was technically his senior brother, and would let him off the hook. Six Desires, you have always prided yourself on your cleverness, but you have made the wrong decision at every turn. Do you know what the biggest mistake you made today was? Lord Initial Zen asked. Lord Six Desires looked at him, completely taken aback. At a time like this, Lord Initial Zen had the presence of mind to chat with him in leisure? What kind of mistake had he made today? How did Great Elder Futian die? Lord Initial Zen looked at him and asked. He never fought Yi Futian. How could you be so careless? With all four of us here, how dare you comprehend the mystery of the divine body? I didn't comprehend the mystery of the divine body, not all of it, just a little bit. If I had really comprehended all of it, would I show it? Lord Six Desires retorted. He realized something was amiss before, but now Lord Initial Zen's words reminded him of another possibility, and the look on his face was becoming more unsightly. That's why I said that you are being stupid. You didn't really comprehend the body at all, but you thought you did, even just a little bit. What you didn't know was that someone had deliberately aided you in sending you on your way to death. Not only did you not realize it, but you reveled in your greed instead. Lord Initial Zen continued. Lord Six Desires felt a chill in his heart. He turned his gaze to a direction far away, where Yi Futian was. He guessed what the answer would be. He had been fighting and had no time to think before, but everything became clear to him as soon as Lord Initial Zen spoke. Both Lord Yi and Lord Liberty glanced at Yi Futian in the distance, wondering what had happened. Yi Futian was a little surprised when he heard Lord Initial Zen's words. He didn't expect the first person who saw through the ploy would be Lord Initial Zen. Yi Futian had suspected that Lord Initial Zen was the most dangerous. He had been right about that. Lord Initial Zen looked at Lord Six Desires, the divine light still lingering. He continued, Six Desires, I must thank you since none of this would have been possible without you. After you die, I will take care of our young friend for you. Initial Zen, we are both cultivators in the Western world, and it was not easy for us to cultivate to the state we are in today. Why can't you just let me go? Lord Six Desires said as he looked at the Lord Initial Zen, seeking a way to stay alive. Since you can be killed or let go, why would I let you go? You have cultivated to this state, can't you understand this? Lord Initial Zen replied simply and clearly. Since they had already become enemies, he was a hidden threat. Nothing would persuade Lord Initial Zen otherwise. If Lord Six Desires had the opportunity to kill him, he most certainly would not pass it up. As soon as his words fell, a strong murderous intent shot from his eyes, and a terrifying aura erupted from him. A gigantic Buddha appeared above the sky, sheltering the sky and the sun. Lord Six Desires stared at that massive body of the Buddha, and a hint of hatred flashed through his eyes. Compared to Yi Futian's plotting, he hated Lord Initial Zen more. After all, he was the one who kept Yi Futian here first, so it was completely within his expectation for Yi Futian to plot against him for his own survival. Lord Initial Zen had not only plotted against him, but he also demanded his life, refusing to let him go. Naturally, he hated him even more. Today, would he die here? In his current state, facing Lord Initial Zen, who was in his peak form, chances were good that Lord Six Desires was unlikely to live to see another day. At this moment, a voice was transmitted into Lord Six Desires' ears. His heart trembled. At this moment between life and death, why are you still hesitating? Suddenly, a hint of decisiveness flashed through Lord Six Desires' eyes. The golden divine light was shining, going toward another direction. At this moment, the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor appeared from nowhere, and that golden divine light was pouring into it madly. Ha! Finally, something managed to disturb Lord Initial Zen's serenity. Lord Six Desires' soul was now entering the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. What was this going to accomplish? Do you want to die? Asked an indifferent voice. Just as Lord Initial Zen moved toward Lord Six Desires, the gigantic handprint of Buddhism directly blasted on the body, causing it to collapse immediately. It was pulverized under that terrifying attack. That's nuts! When Lord Yi and Lord Liberty witnessed this scene, their hearts trembled violently. If Lord Six Desires appeared crazy when he was dealing with them before, then he was completely insane at this moment, and did not leave any way out for himself. Although individuals at their level could separate spiritual souls from bodies and may even remain strong, the fact remained that without a body, the spiritual soul had nowhere to return to. It would exist just like a lonely, wandering ghost. Even if there were the means of walking, the body that was hijacked might not be fitting. Lord Six Desires had to make this choice because he was driven into desperation. Lord Initial Zen refused to let him go, and wanted to kill him. Lord Six Desires had no choice. If he didn't go to the extreme, the only thing that awaited him was death. Just as they thought, Lord Six Desires made a decision almost instantly after receiving Futian's transmission. He had no choice, really. Either he would be killed outright, or give up his physical body and seize the chance to avenge himself. Because his hatred was great, this choice had not been difficult at all. He had forsaken his body of flesh. Chapter 2444, Battling Initial Zen. What's happening? Lord Initial Zen was a little baffled. Was Lord Six Desires mad enough to abandon his physical body and allowed his spiritual soul to enter the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor? But what was the point? Lord Six Desires had not comprehended the divine body. Therefore, he had no ability to control the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. Unless, as Lord Initial Zen considered another possibility, he immediately glanced in the direction of Futian, who was far in the distance. Could he have accomplished this? Instructing Lord Six Desires to control the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. In other words, he was using the spiritual soul of Lord Six Desires to unleash the power in the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. This was the only possible explanation for Lord Six Desires' steely resolve to abandon his own physical form so readily just for the opportunity of an all-out battle to the death. Boom! Lord Initial Zen had a thought, and suddenly, the Buddha that stood between heaven and earth blasted its palm prints downward. These golden palm prints were endless, sheltering the sky and the sun. That giant Buddha palm print in the middle, especially, was boundless and enormous. It directly slammed toward the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. But at this time, a most dreadful light exploded from the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. Countless runes flew out as the power of path obliteration swept through this corner of the sky. The divine body of the Great Emperor raised his hand and pointed ahead, countering the giant palm print that was blasting down. Numerous golden lights of destruction fell on the giant palm prints, containing the power of path obliteration, penetrating the palm prints readily. Soon, these gigantic palm prints began to pulverize like crazy. Even the palm prints that fell in the surrounding areas were destroyed by the blooming golden divine light. Lord Initial Zen regarded the sight in front of him with alarm. His attention was fixed on the divine body as he asked, "Are you Futian or are you Six Desires?" At this moment, who was in control of this divine body? In the distance, the golden divine light that had enveloped this corner of the sky suddenly descended in one specific direction. It was attacking Futian's actual physical location. As long as Futian was taken down, it didn't matter if the divine body was controlled by Futian or Lord Six Desires. This battle was over. But almost at the same moment, golden runes surrounded Futian's entire body. A stream of light flashed across the void, and Futian's body appeared behind the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, protected by divine light, to guard him against any potential attacks from his opponent. Lord Yi and Lord Liberty witnessed the sight in front of them. They secretly thought that had Lord Six Desires and Futian joined hands earlier, and if Futian told Lord Six Desires everything, perhaps Six Desires' body might have been preserved, and he would not have met such a miserable end. But the two sides were diametrically opposed, to begin with, each plotting against the other. Lord Six Desires had his own designs regarding Futian, while Lord Initial Zen conspired against Lord Six Desires and the rest of them. But in the end, it seemed that Futian was the ultimate schemer, as he had hatched a plan of his own. In the end, who would profit? Futian closed his eyes as his spiritual soul also separated from his body to enter the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. The divine light of the Great Path continuously poured into the divine body, like infinite branches and leaves. It integrated the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, and his own as if combining the two into one. The aura blooming from the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was becoming more terrifying. When his eyes opened, a world of runes appeared. In this world, it seemed to be occupied by nothing but endless runes. Even Lord Initial Zen and the phantom of the ancient Buddha could not escape it. At this moment, Lord Initial Zen felt a strong sense of threat. In this world of runes, he detected an aura of path obliteration. And those divine lights that came down seemed to have the ability to destroy all powers of the Great Path. Lord Initial Zen, looking solemn, clasped his hands in front of him. The massive figure of Buddha behind him projected infinite golden rays. In this world of the runes, the infinite light of Buddha radiated as the endless light gathered in the void, turning into a gigantic and boundless symbol of Wan. The symbol of Wan revolved in the void, and a wave of mighty coercion erupted from above. Endless radiance sprinkled down as boundless and heavy energy permeated between heaven and earth. Accompanied by the sound of Buddha, the rotating symbol of Wan continued pressing downwards, and countless rays of light attacked the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. However, the divine body also emitted incomparable divine light, turning into a golden light of catastrophe that could end all great paths. At the same time, countless runes turned into branches and leaves and continued to bloom upwards. That's the ability of Lord Six Desires. Lord Initial Zen sharpened his eyes when he saw this. Was Lord Six Desires the one controlling the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor after all? The body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor seemed to be transformed into an ancient tree, and the branches and leaves were formed by those countless lights of catastrophe. It bloomed and grew until it had covered the entire sky. Then, it fell on that oppressive Buddhist symbol of Wan with a terrible thud. The symbol of Wan continued to press down. Its coercion was shocking and mighty, suppressing the world with unmatched prowess. Even the sky around them seemed to be on the verge of total collapse. With the descent of the runes, those branches and leaves, formed by the light of catastrophe, started to grow inside the runes and perpetrated within them. They seemed to have penetrated inside the symbol of Wan. Even as the divine seal fell downward, countless branches and leaves had gotten inside of it. The body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor pointed towards the sky, and in an instant, countless divine lights exploded within the symbol of Wan. This massive and incomparable rune that had shielded the sky began bursting like crazy, shattered into countless spots of light, then dissipating into nothingness. The power of path obliteration! Lord Initial Zen's heart trembled when he felt that power. He could clearly sense the power of path obliteration contained within the blows dealt by Xinjiao the Great Emperor. It was something that could destroy all great paths. More importantly, this was done under the condition that Lord Six Desires may not have absolute control over the divine body of the Great Emperor. Lord Initial Zen understood that six desires might have only achieved this by leveraging Futian's spiritual soul. Otherwise, if Lord Six Desires had comprehended and obtained full control of this divine body by himself, the power with which it could be exerted would definitely not be limited to this. It might have crushed him with ease. It seemed that his opponent was still acting under considerable restraints. Just as he was considering all the possibilities, endless runes appeared in the void once again. Each rune had turned into a halo of light, and each halo puffed out the light of catastrophe as if forming a sword. Lord Initial Zen could feel that the threat was getting greater by the moment. With each proficient maneuver of the divine body exercised by his opponent, he may soon be in danger. A quick battle was in order if he wanted to smash his opponent's spirit soul once and for all, while Lord Six Desires was not yet familiar with the command of the divine body. When his thought turned to this, Lord Initial Zen's countenance changed as he clasped his hands in front of him and closed his eyes. Suddenly, the light of Buddha beamed all over the space, and numerous Buddhas appeared between heaven and earth. In this vast space, these Buddhas emerged from nowhere, all of them acting synchronously as him, as their presence engulfed this entire space. The sound of Buddha lingered, resounding throughout the world, and it was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Lord Yi and Lord Liberty both felt a painful tingling in their minds as their spiritual souls quaked. They had some difficulties maintaining their balance. This was the Buddhist supreme offensive technique, way of the sonic wave, which could eradicate someone's spiritual soul outright. The prowess of this sound could attack the spiritual souls even within the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. Chapter 2445 Murderous Intent. Boom! Drowned by the attacks of the sonic waves, the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was knocked back a few steps, somewhat shaken. Watching what was happening gave Lord Initial Zen a cold satisfaction inside. These two were using their spiritual souls to control the divine body, therefore, the spiritual souls were an obvious weak point. As soon as their spiritual souls were eliminated, this battle would be over. Lord Initial Zen's eyes closed as the light of Buddha burned fervently. The great path sound of Buddha lingered, resounding through heaven and earth. The power of the sonic waves continued to sweep towards the divine body. But at this moment, Xinjiao the Great Emperor managed to stabilize himself, and an even more dazzling divine light bloomed from the divine body. Infinite runes swept across this space, accompanied by the release of countless radiance. Even the power of that invisible sonic waves was being weakened. The sonic waves' attack was invisible and left no trace, but it was definitely weakening under the divine light. It was gradually being suppressed and destroyed bit by bit. The sonic waves continued getting weaker. The vast world was full of divine light radiated from the divine body. Path obliteration can obliterate all great paths. In its domain, no other powers of the great path are allowed. Lord Yi and Lord Liberty had sensed the true meaning hidden within this destructive attack, and their hearts palpitated as they watched. Furthermore, the power that erupted from the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was clearly becoming stronger. If this were to continue, Lord Initial Zen was very likely to, as soon as Lord Initial Zen thought he had discovered his opponent's weak point, his great path sonic waves attack disintegrated. He couldn't help but began to worry. The power that was erupting from the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was nearly invincible because it could annihilate any great paths. According to rumors, Xinjiao the Great Emperor sought to contend with the heavenly path in ancient times. If the attacking power of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was a kind of great path, then it could be a power much higher than theirs, so it was daring enough to compete with the heavenly path. This kind of power was nearly incomprehensible by the likes of them. Obviously, Futian and Lord Six Desires' control over the divine body was getting stronger. Buzz! At this moment, a string of golden Buddhist beads appeared in Lord Initial Zen's hands. A horrific aura bloomed above the beads. There were 108 beads altogether, and each of the beads released a different kind of powerful aura, all of which stemmed from Buddhism. The power of the Great Path madly poured into the Buddhist beads. Then, Lord Initial Zen waved his hand, and beads flew out, only to reappear in the sky above the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. It was expanding continuously, turning into a massive halo, emitting the light of Buddha as far as the eye could see. An extremely holy Buddhist divine glory sprinkled down from the void. Lord Initial Zen clasped his hands together in utmost piety. The power of the great path above the divine body rushed into the Buddhist beads with madness, and suddenly all 108 Buddhist beads burst open, turning into 108 sets of Buddhas. All 108 Buddhas then united into one body. Above the firmament, the sound of Buddha lingered as a horrific aura diffused from each and every Buddha. The auras of all 108 Buddhas descended at the same time. Its collective might was enough to overpower the heavens. Clang! Voices came out as all 108 Buddhas moved in unison. The giant handprints blasted down, crushing the void, and suddenly, countless symbols of Wan appeared. They slammed down on the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor at the same time as frightening rumbling could be heard. The entire space seemed on the verge of collapse. Xinjiao the Great Emperor raised his head slightly and looked at the Buddhas in the sky. From within the divine body, even more branches and leaves now bloomed. There was a divine light surrounding the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, as a massive golden lotus could be seen faintly. Branches and leaves seemed to grow out of the golden lotus. This golden lotus first opened up with 6 petals, then 6 turned into 36 petals, and continued like so in repetition, going round and round, moving towards the giant handprints that slammed down from the void in attack. The dreadful handprints and the symbols of Wan had all been blocked as if they were being swallowed by the golden lotus. What's more terrifying was that every golden lotus was conceived by the destructive light of catastrophe. The lotus was born between heaven and earth, intending to envelop the boundless space and swallow up all 108 Buddhas. 6th Desire Lotus! Lord Ye's heart was trembling when he saw the scene before him. This was Lord 6th Desire's life spirit, hidden within his spiritual soul. And at this moment, it was blooming, carrying the path obliteration power inside Xinjiao the Great Emperor. There was no telling how frightening it would be. The 6th Desire's lotus was known for its ability to swallow the paths of all things and produce the catastrophe of destruction. The endless desires gave rise to endless lotuses. It seems that Lord 6th Desires is really controlling the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. He is maneuvering it with more proficiency. Initial Zen is going to be in trouble, Lord Liberty said to Lord Yi via voice transmission. But the two could only watch on the sidelines. Both of them had been grievously injured and had no way to participate in the battle at the moment. All they could do was wait to die. More importantly, Lord Initial Zen was the one who set them up, so there was no way they would be participating in this battle. They were content to watch from the side, but a bit of worry troubled them both. Now, they probably wouldn't be able to get away even if they wanted to. The legend had it that the 6th Desire's lotus contained endless desires. At this moment, endless lotus flowers were born, intending to swallow that 108 Buddhas. All 108 shadows of Buddha release a boundless and splendid light of Buddha. An even more majestic shadow of Buddha now appeared above the firmament, as if its head was pushing against the heavens as the feet were planted firmly on the ground. The feet stomped down without warning, wanting to smash the golden lotus. The golden lotus blossoms shattered and pulverized one by one, but the 6th Desire's lotus seemed to be born out of endless desires. Thus as it died, it was reborn endlessly and forever until it shrouded all 108 Buddhas. Then it turned toward that enormous and incomparable shadow of Buddha to swallow it up next. In an instant, the 6th Desire lotus that was born continuously submerged the entire sky. Then, a light of destruction bloomed from every golden lotus so that all 108 Buddhas proceeded to explode and pulverize. Even that boundless gigantic shadow of the Buddha was being eaten up little by little, then collapsed in total destruction. Pooh! Lord Initial Zen groaned as he spat out a mouthful of blood. The light of Buddha on his body dimmed considerably. His eyes looked towards the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. My friend, I was never malicious to you. Why should it be like this between us? Stop now, and you can name any conditions you want, he pleaded. Lord Initial Zen wanted to negotiate a truce. Futian laughed coldly inside when he heard the others plead. Lord Initial Zen had a scheming heart. He had set up Lord Yi and Lord Liberty, wanting to kill Lord Six Desires to avoid future trouble. It was still an unknown whether he would move against the other two lords as for himself. If Lord Six Desires died and he fell into the hands of Lord Initial Zen, his fate would be thousands of times worse. Lord Initial Zen would definitely keep him under tighter control than Lord Six Desires ever had. Therefore, Futian had planned accordingly and executed the plan as expected. He was lucky. He was right that Lord Six Desires didn't hesitate when he was forced to face that impossible situation. Elder had misunderstood. "It's not me who is doing all this," said a calm voice from Xinjia the Great Emperor. It was light as a feather and carefree. It sounded as if nothing had anything to do with him, as if it were Lord Six Desires who wanted to continue this fatal exchange. "Surely, my young friend is joking. How could he continue to control the divine body of the Great Emperor if you stopped?" Lord Initial Zen continued. He knew very well that Lord Six Desires could no longer turn back as his body no longer existed. No matter what, Six Desires would want to kill him anyway. The only chance he had was to talk to Futian. This time, Futian didn't pay any attention to him. The divine light sparkled on Xinjia the Great Emperor as countless golden lotus flowers swallowed toward Lord Initial Zen. Chapter 2446 Unwilling to Let Go. Lord Initial Zen retreated quickly with incredible speed. However, above the firmament, those infinite runes seemed to transform into golden lotus flowers at this instant, swallowing up all the great paths. An enormous lotus flower of Six Desires bloomed and swallowing in the direction of Lord Initial Zen, including that gigantic Buddha behind him. "My young friend, you already have no place to go in the land of divine prefecture. Do you want to be hunted endlessly in the Western world as well?" said Lord Initial Zen as mighty as ever, resounding between heaven and earth. Of course, I don't want that, Futian thought, but there was nowhere for him to go at the moment. Ever since he came to the Western world, from Great Elder Mutian to Lord Six Desires, and now Lord Initial Zen, they all had regarded him as prey or as treasure, something to take for themselves. This being the case, all he could do was to teach them a lesson and make them pay. In addition, it was not like he had another choice either. Even if he could let Lord Initial Zen go, would the other be able to reciprocate the courtesy? This possibility was highly unlikely. If Lord Initial Zen did not die in this battle, he would surely try to take him down and keep Futian firmly in his hold. Who knew what that would be like? Therefore, killing him was the only way. The light of Buddha was burning fervently as a supreme power of Buddhism sprung from Lord Initial Zen. However, the infinite Six Desires golden lotus moved swiftly to swallow it up. In the golden lotus, Lord Initial Zen could see the elusive figure of Lord Six Desires, whose face was horribly distorted. Coupled with immense anger, he was coming to swallow him whole. In an instant, that enormous phantom of the Buddha began to collapse, followed by a chilling scream. Terrifying golden divine light bloomed like mad as Lord Initial Zen growled angrily inside the golden lotus. Then an image emerged, in which many Buddhist cultivators seemed to have appeared. There seemed to be a sacred Buddhist mountain, and on a golden lotus seat was a figure bathed in the light of Buddha. Its appearance was extremely solemn and dignified. There was a holiness that was beyond description. "Senior brother, avenge me!" Lord Initial Zen howled, then the image disappeared. The power of path obliteration raged wildly, destroying his body as well as his spiritual soul. Horrific aura rampaged in this space, and it didn't take long before the body of Lord Initial Zen dissipated into nothing. His soul and spirit dispersed as he died. He disappeared entirely between heaven and earth. "He's dead!" Someone with the status of a Buddhist lord had been slain just like that. Moreover, he died at the hands of a youngster from Divine Prefecture. Lord Initial Zen had used those three great lords, his own peers, certain in his belief that he would be the ultimate winner. But in the end, he was tricked by Futian. Futian used the spiritual soul of Lord Six Desires to unleash an even stronger state of the divine body, causing it to burst with an unimaginable power of path obliteration. In any world, there would not be many existences at the same level as Lord Initial Zen. Both Lord Yi and Lord Liberty were greatly disturbed in their hearts. They had thought of many possibilities, but never the one in which the body of Lord of Six Desires was totally destroyed and ended with Lord Initial Zen's death. Furthermore, both of them were severely wounded, and their combat effectiveness had been greatly reduced. All this was so surreal. Only Yi Futian, after getting rid of the two major threats, Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen, was likely to move forward. With nothing more than his spiritual soul, Lord Six Desires had no way of posing any threat to Yi Futian. As they looked at the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, they noticed that the divine light inside the divine body was raging. The divine body was moving frantically on its own. It seemed a little unsteady at times. Both of them looked on with some confusion, but as soon as they looked at each other, they guessed what was happening. After getting rid of Lord Initial Zen, Lord Six Desires must still have some resentment in his heart, and his spiritual soul now wanted to fight for the chance to seize the control of the divine body. Or perhaps, Yi Futian didn't intend to allow the spiritual soul of Six Desires to walk out of here alive? A faint roar came from inside the divine body, and a terrifying divine light bloomed. Clearly, the two were locked in a confrontation. Lord Yi and Lord Liberty looked at each other, and there was a hint of greed that flashed through their eyes. But it vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. At present, even as lords, they needed to pay more attention to Yi Futian. Both of them had participated in setting up Lord Six Desires. This has indirectly led to his body being totally annihilated. Lord Initial Zen was killed mostly because of the powers borrowed from Lord Six Desires. Yi Futian had made good use of both parties in achieving his own goal. If they were just the tiniest bit careless, they might also be at risk, so they had to be extra cautious. Fortunately, Yi Futian and Lord Six Desires were mortal enemies. If they had formed a true alliance, the next target, after eliminating Lord Initial Zen, would be the two of them. In that case, they would be in deep trouble. Obviously, whether it was Yi Futian or Lord Six Desires, they were each plotting against the other, and had started colluding. The outcome remained to be seen. "Do you want to leave him alone?" Lord Yi asked Lord Liberty via voice transmission. "Wait until there's a decisive outcome between them, and then we can reassess the situation," Lord Liberty responded. The problem now was that even if they decided not to move against Yi Futian, it wouldn't necessarily mean that Yi Futian wouldn't move against them later. Both men were trying to regain their strength and ease their injuries as much as possible so they could recover some of their power once again. Within the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, violent booming continued. It seemed that it would never end. Finally, a growl emerged. "I admit defeat. Let me stay. I can help you." This growl was tinged with wretchedness. It was the voice of Lord Six Desires. Obviously, he had fallen into a disadvantage in this altercation. If it was simply a contest between spiritual souls, Yi Futian could never come close to touching Lord Six Desires. However, within the divine body, Yi Futian was its absolute commander and had an undisputed advantage. Everything seemed to return to where it had all began. Yi Futian, who was currently controlling the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, turned to face Lord Yi and Lord Liberty. "I do not wish to make too many enemies. How about you two elders stop at this point?" These two great cultivators had both survived the second divine tribulation of the Great Path. Although both of them had been seriously injured, Yi Futian was not sure that he could overcome both of them. As a rule, people at this level must be treated with extreme caution. Today's matter was a misunderstanding in itself. We know that Lord Six Desires restricted your movements without cause. All we wanted to do was help set you free from those chains. We didn't expect Lord Initial Zen to do what he did. However, since the matter is over, let us be done as well," Lord Yi replied. "In that case, many thanks to you both." As Yi Futian was making his reply, he moved backward carefully. The divine brilliance was still shining over his body. Yi Futian continued to stay vigilant. He didn't want to risk a fight with these two opponents, but it didn't mean he would lower his defense. For these two great lords to declare this was just some type of misunderstanding was ludicrous, to say the least. They were no different from Lord Initial Zen, except that they were not quite as calculating as he. Now, Lord Yi transmitted his voice to Lord Liberty as a terrible rumbling sound came out. The will of the Great Path enveloped this part of the world and hovered over this area. Even if they were severely injured. Chapter 2447 The Search. Buzz. Divine light bloomed upon Yi Futian's body as infinite runes shrouded the boundless space. He took one look at the two lords across from him, seemingly wanting to bring them into his realm of total annihilation. Lord Liberty and Lord Yi were both surrounded by the divine light of sky-reaching Great Path. Even if they were deeply wounded, they could still communicate with the Great Path, gathering incredible power. Lord Liberty took a deep breath as a towering divine shadow appeared. It looked like the heavenly god of liberty itself, unleashing a boundless and massive handprint at Yi Futian. Lord Yi, likewise, was gathering a terrifying power of destruction. This shockingly destructive light aimed at Yi Futian for the kill. It was akin to the way of total annihilation. Xinjiao the Great Emperor's body was brilliant all over, surrounded by divine light, and covered in infinite runes. A terrible attack descended to crush the runes. It blasted on the divine body, knocking the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor back. At the same time, divine lights came down from the firmament, as if formed by those infinite runes. The incomparable divine sword traversed heaven and earth, zooming in on Lord Yi and Lord Liberty for the kill. The faces of these two changed slightly, busy gathering the power of the Great Path to resist. But they had already suffered heavy injuries. Their bodies bore the scars of the Great Path, and their last tyrannical blow against Yi Futian had, in fact, pared their own strength down to the extreme. When the divine sword fell, it actually broke through their defenses and slashed toward them. Accompanied by the brilliance of these two divine lights, the two fell rapidly as sounds of howling and cracking came from the void. Lord Liberty and Lord Yi were once again penetrated by the light from the divine sword. They both let out a muffled groan as they spat out some blood. Their faces paled, and their injuries deepened with this most recent blow. Yi Futian and Lord Yi appeared in two completely different directions, with great distance between them. At this time, the divine light above the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor dimmed. He had also sustained a harsh blow from the two powerful cultivators, which caused the divine body to suffer considerable shock. His spiritual soul was also in great pain. Lord Yi and Lord Liberty managed to stabilize their stance but coughed out a mouthful of blood. Their auras were now exceedingly weak. They looked at Yi Futian, and their eyes were filled with coldness. It seemed like they were still unwilling to let go of Yi Futian and planned to continue their joint attack. The Great Path fluctuated violently with the turning of a mind. However, at this moment, a massive telekinetic power washed over them. They frowned before they saw a beautiful figure descending. She was surrounded by divine light, and her cold eyes were fixed on the two of them. The person who arrived was none other than Hua Jieyu. She hadn't left with Blind Tai and the others but was hanging about nearby. She came here as soon as she heard about the battle. At this moment, in those cold and clear eyes of hers, there was a strong murderous intent. Jieyu, let's go, Yi Futian said in a voice that seemed uncharacteristically weak, plucking at Hua Jieyu's heartstrings. Her eyes refocused on him, and instantly, her gaze softened. Her shape flickered. She did not bother to heed Lord Yi or the other one any longer but chose to leave with the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. Yi Futian loathed to let her get tangled in this mess because he still had some reservations. Even though Lord Yi and Lord Liberty were greatly weakened, they were existences that had survived the second divine tribulation of the Great Path. Such characters were a tremendous threat as long as they were alive. He was more worried about Jieyu being endangered that he rather retreat for now. Lord Yi and Lord Liberty did not bother to chase after them either. The truth was that they were unable to give chase, as they were greatly incapacitated at this time. As they watched the pair leaving, they sighed silently inside. Yi Futian was a dead man walking. The addition of another Renhuang wouldn't make any difference. Since Lord Initial Zen had informed Saint Jinchan of his death, presumably the cultivators from Jinchan Temple were now on their way over. None of the four great lords were able to take down Futian. In turn, they were set up by Futian time and time again. Now 2 were dead, and 2 were wounded. It was an outcome that was indescribably humiliating. Whatever the future held, the 2 of them probably would have no part to play after this miserable display. No one expected that a youngster from the Divine Prefecture would make such a mess out of things. "Let's go," said Lord Yi. Then, he and Lord Liberty dragged their injured bodies away from the battlefield. After they had left for a while, rays of divine light fell from the sky over the remnant of the Divine Mountain. A group of people descended soon after the light, all of them radiating with divine light. It seemed as if they were divine generals of sorts. Their brilliance was blinding and mighty. They were shrouded with a hint of the light of Buddha, but they were no monks. Among the cultivators from the Western world, though many top figures cultivated in methods that stemmed from Buddhism, it did not mean that they were believers of Buddhism. "Take the overall forces within 6 desires heaven and search thoroughly," the man in the lead said, loud and clear. Immediately, the cultivators next to him broke through the air and departed towards various directions in the distance. The cultivator in the lead looked again in the distance, and saw quite a lot of cultivators there. They were also present in 6 desires heaven previously, but they had no way to intervene in that battle, nor did they dare chase after Futian. When Futian left, 2 lords had fallen, while 2 more were seriously wounded. Who would dare make a move without careful consideration? "Show me everything you saw," the man demanded. Right away, someone stepped forward. As his divine consciousness surged, an image appeared in the void, but only in parts. The great path had blocked off most of the space during the battle, and they could not witness many great battle scenes. Under the condition at the time, no one else dared to enter deep into the battlefield. Mere ripples from the battle would easily destroy them. After witnessing what little he could glean from the battle, the cultivator in the lead had a golden divine light in his eyes. Was the divine body of Xinjiao the great emperor as powerful as this? He should have been seriously injured. If you would have intercepted him, he couldn't possibly get away. The leader glanced at those in the far distance and commented. Among them, there was no lack of those who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. However, because of the devastating consequences of the 4 lords, they didn't want to detain Futian. "Let's set off with the search." As the man commanded once more, all those cultivators levitated into the air immediately, heading for the different directions within 6 desires heaven, ready to sniff out any trace of Futian. 6 desires heaven was a big world, unimaginably expansive with endless cities, domains, numerous celestial mountains, as well as cultivation courts. After Hua Jieyu took Futian away from 6 desires heaven, they did not go too far from where the fight took place. They came to a city and found a place to settle down. Traces of invisible aura fluctuated to cover up the place where they were resting. It was invisible and shapeless but capable of isolating any aura or divine consciousness from other top cultivators. This was a forbidden zone created by Futian with his life spirit. Despite its perfect fit with the house and the courtyard, it was an independent small world completely undetectable by outsiders. The divine consciousness of top figures in the cultivation world could cover an extensive territory with a single sweep. But as they were used to conduct their search with their divine consciousness and not with their naked eyes, as long as their divine consciousness was cut off, it was no easy task to find a single person in this vast and endless land of 6 desires heaven. In the courtyard, Futian's spiritual soul had already returned to his body, as he had his eyes closed and was deep in cultivation, bathing in the aura of the great path of life. The aura from the ancient tree of the world in his life spirit had penetrated every part of his body, restoring and repairing it, as his spiritual soul was being nourished. Chapter 2448 Master and Disciple. A month later, in the courtyard where Futian was staying, he was still cultivating with his eyes closed. The aura of the great path shrouded his entire body as he bathed in the brilliance of the great path. At this point, his body, as well as his spiritual soul, had almost fully recovered. He did not let Blind Tai and the others come back for him. After all, they were still in the territory of 6 desires heaven. Saint Shinchan had dispatched cultivators from all sides to search for them in Six Desires Heaven. They had turned the place upside down and inside out in their attempt to find him. At a time like this, he could not possibly allow Blind Tai and the rest of them to risk their lives by coming here. As long as they were outside of Six Desires Heaven, they were safe enough. In this 1 month's time, Futian did not leave the courtyard at all. At this moment, there was an invisible movement coming from outside the courtyard. It entered like invisible ripples that came in waves, and only Futian had perceived this sensation. However, he didn't pay much attention to it. He continued to cultivate with his eyes closed because he already knew who had come. Hua Jiu was sitting close to Futian. At this moment, her beautiful eyes opened as she looked forward and saw a young woman. This woman had exceptionally beautiful and clear eyes. Her refined features were particularly pleasing to look at. Her name was Hong Yi. She was the daughter of the owner of this house. She happened upon here once by chance and saw Hua Jiu. She had been so taken, even enamored with Hua Jiu, that she asked Hua Jiu to accept her as a disciple. Hua Jiu had never thought of accepting a disciple before, so she didn't agree to it immediately. However, Hong Yi was not deterred and would often come to visit. Gradually, Hua Jiu and Futian had developed some affection for this young woman and had recruited her help in conducting some small tasks, such as making inquiries about things happening in the outside world. Of course, the main purpose was to find out more about Saint Shinchan's search for them. In addition, he wanted to obtain a detailed map of this world. Not just the names of the places, but also the top powers and top cultivators in each world. Futian wanted to get a clear picture of the basic situation in the Western world. However, Han Ye's cultivation base was not very high, so it was not easy for her to get what Futian wanted. It took a lot of time and effort, but she finally got what he was after today. Goddess, this is the jade slip of the map. Once your divine consciousness enters it, you will be able to see everything, Hong Yi said while she took out a jade slip and handed it to Hua Jiu. Once Hua Jiu took hold of it, Hong Yi smiled sweetly and said, Goddess, can I ask you to be my teacher now? Hua Jiu looked at the woman in front of her, a little surprised. She didn't expect the other to be so persistent. You will leave sooner or later, and I may disappear at any time, Hua Jiu said to Hong Yi. It doesn't matter. I don't mind, Hong Yi continued. While Hua Jiu was still hesitating, Futian, who was next to her, opened his eyes and smiled at her. Jiu, he said, since Hong Yi is sincere, why don't you accept her as a disciple? Although she may leave at any time, while we are cultivating here, we may leave something behind. Hua Jiu immediately understood Futian's intention. When he saw how sincere Hong Yi was, he wished that Hua Jiu would not care so much about the formalities between teacher and disciple. While they were here, they could teach Hong Yi a thing or two and mentor her just for the sake of making acquaintances with one another. The relationship of teacher and disciple had no real impact on any of them. Glancing at Futian, Hua Jiu pondered for a moment. She then nodded at Hong Yi. She handed Futian the jade slip she had received. Thank you, teacher. Hong Yi was ecstatic when she saw that Hua Jiu had finally agreed to her request. She immediately bowed down and said, Disciple Hong Yi greets the teacher. Hua Jiu nodded slightly and said, Although you asked me to be your teacher, my cultivation may not be suitable for you. I will teach you some suitable methods, and if you have any questions regarding cultivation, you may also ask me. The Hua Jiu from once upon a time had practically no cultivational experience to speak of. But now, she had emerged with incarnations of many lifetimes, which were all part of her memory. She knew far more cultivation methods than Futian, although none would be as powerful as the divine methods cultivated by him. It's you, teacher. As long as it is taught by teacher, Hong Yi will work hard, Hong Yi said with mirth. The first time she was here, she had sensed that Hua Jiu was extraordinary and saw her as someone not of this world. Whether it was her visage, temperament, her every word and action, or that hidden aura, she realized that Hua Jiu was definitely a very powerful cultivator. Of course, Futian was a powerful cultivator himself, though he was a little too conspicuous with his white hair and white clothing. Hong Yi couldn't very well ask him to be her teacher in front of Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu nodded and said, "Why don't you go back first? I need to organize the cultivation methods in my memory and decide which ones are suitable for you." "Very well." Hong Yi nodded agreeably. "I will go now." With that, she smiled and left. After she left, Hua Jieyu looked at Yi Futian and saw that he looked at her with a smile. She then asked him, "Why did you want me to accept her as a disciple? Buddhism talks about predestination, doesn't it? Since we are cultivating in the Western world, destiny is the reason why you two met. So you can leave something here, even if it is just to create a pleasant memory." Yi Futian responded. When he was speaking, he took the jade slip from Hua Jieyu. His divine consciousness directly penetrated it. In an instant, many images began appearing in his mind. Soon, the world of Buddhism made its impression in Yi Futian's mind. When he withdrew his divine consciousness, he took a deep breath and was a little surprised. He didn't expect that the strength of the Western world was so powerful that it was on par with the divine prefecture. The rest of their time was spent in relative quietude. Hong Yi came here often to consult Hua Jieyu about cultivation. Sometimes she would ask Yi Futian as well. Once, she even asked curiously, "Teacher, what is your current realm in Rahuang?" Hua Jieyu ignored her, so Hong Yi looked at Yi Futian. But Yi Futian just smiled without saying a word. He did not respond to her question. It must be a very powerful level. Maybe you have already surpassed the lower Renhuang realm. That would mean middle Renhuang. Hong Yi smiled and guessed. After cultivating for a period of time, she left again. These days, she came around quite frequently. Sometimes she stayed in their place days at a time. One day, when Hong Yi came to the courtyard again, it seemed that her eyes had undergone some change. They looked different from before. It was slightly uncanny. Hua Jieyu looked at her, clearly sensing something was awry. "Hong Yi, what's the matter?" Yi Futian's perception was so keen. Hong Yi glanced at him when she heard Yi Futian's question. She bit her lip lightly, seeming to be in some pain while struggling inside. It must be false. Hong Yi reminded herself. She then said to Hua Jieyu, "Teacher, please leave here quickly." Hua Jieyu frowned slightly, but Yi Futian tensed up. These words had unsettled him. Chapter 2449, Exposed. "Hong Yi, what happened?" asked Hua Jieyu. Hong Yi looked at Hua Jieyu and said, "Master, previously, you secretly asked me about what Saint Xinchan's underlings were up to. Now, Saint Xinchan has issued an order to investigate all mansions and cities in 6 Desires Heavens. Moreover, a bounty is offered to anyone among the top forces of various regions who can identify the 2 fiends who instigated the fight between Lord 6 Desires and Lord Initial Zen. The whistleblower is required to reveal their images too." As she said this, Hong Yi paused and looked at Hua Jieyu and Yi Futian. She then asked, "Master, did the 2 of you really instigate the fight between the 2 lords a few months ago? Were you the ones who caused the death of the 2 lords when the 4 of them fought among themselves? The bounty offered by Saint Xinchan is surely an eye-watering amount. Why have you come to inform us to leave instead of reporting our whereabouts to him and claiming the bounty?" Yi Futian asked. There was pain hidden in Hong Ye's eyes when she looked at him. Then, she looked at Hua Jieyu and explained, "Wouldn't I be betraying my sect if I exposed the whereabouts of Master? I can't do that." Yi Futian continued, "Since you believe the rumors about both of us instigating the fight among the 4 lords, have you considered this? What bargaining chip did we have that was great enough to incite them to war? Furthermore, the reason was tempting enough to cause the 2 of them to kill each other." Yi Futian's question caused Hong Yi to be stunned. She was puzzled. She looked at him and asked, "What was it?" Yi Futian explained, "I'm not a cultivator from your world. I'm from another world. I was detained in the Divine Mountain by Lord 6 Desires due to the treasures I possessed. After the other 3 lords learned about what happened, they were blinded by greed as well. They went to Lord 6 Desires and demanded he give them the treasures. This was the cause of the fight. I have indeed instigated the fight among the 4 lords. However, if I did not do so, I would have been at their mercy. I would not have survived. His words shocked Hong Yi. Yi Futian glanced at Hua Jieyu and noticed that she remained calm. So that's why. In that case, their greed for treasure resulted in the war. Then, for Saint Xingqian to spare no expense to search and offer a bounty for finding you means, mumbled Hong Yi as she suddenly understood. She looked at Hua Jieyu and Yi Futian and said, Master, now the people in the city have seen both of your portraits. There is no way for you to leave. What should we do? That won't be a problem, said Yi Futian. Go and tell them that the two of us are here. Hong Yi was stunned. She looked at Yi Futian and then at Hua Jieyu. She did not comprehend. Go, instructed Hua Jieyu. Master, replied Hong Yi as she stared at her. Hua Jieyu explained to Hong Yi. If we do not sever the ties between us, we will only get you involved. Hong Yi, do not mention to others that you are my disciple. Aside from you, your father has also seen us, so we will certainly be exposed. However, he will not betray you. Go and inform them of our location. You might be able to claim the bounty. This is the last thing I can do for you as your master. Her voice was also exceptionally calm. No, I will go find my father. If he knows that you have taken me as your disciple, he will not sell you out, master, said Hong Yi. Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu gazed at her. She was still too young. Before personal gain as well as life or death, what did ties like this amount to? They barely knew each other. Why would her father risk his life for them? Hong Yi, Yi Futian continued. Don't worry. Even if you reveal our location, we can still escape. The people of the city cannot keep us here. Otherwise, how did we escape from the War of the Six Desires Heavenly Palace? Since things are bound to happen, there is no need to prevent them from occurring. Asking you to do this is to protect you. You don't wish to make us feel guilty, right? Hong Yi glanced back at Hua Jieyu. Hua Jieyu nodded and said, Go. We will be fine. Seeing that Hong Yi was still hesitating, Hua Jieyu sternly ordered, As your master, I command you to go. Hong Ye's eyes were slightly red. She then nodded her head and replied, Yes, master. As she said this, she turned and left. After Hong Yi left, the divine body of Xinjiao the great emperor appeared. As he looked at it, Yi Futian mumbled, I wonder when I can fight without needing to rely on this. The opponents that you encountered are all cultivators who have experienced the divine tribulation of the Great Path. When you reach the peak of the Renhuan Plain, you might be able to forego relying on the divine body, said Hua Jieyu. She only said that it was a possibility. Even if he did so, the opponents Yi Futian faced were still top figures who survived the second stage of the divine tribulation. Not long after, Yi Futian sensed that many powerful auras were approaching them from all directions. Right then, the formless wave had already disappeared. He no longer hid their auras. Wills swept over and scanned over their figures rudely. In the sky, the silhouettes of many cultivators continued to appear. Many of them were top-tier Renhuangs. After getting news of their location, they rushed over immediately. Saint Xingqian's reward was too irresistible. No one could remain unfazed by it. However, many people did not know of Yi Futian's ability. The exact details of the War of the Six Desires Heavenly Palace had been sealed away. Only some details, just like what Hong Yi knew, were common knowledge. There were not many who were aware of the whole story of the incident. Hong Yi was also among the crowd in the distance. She stood behind her father and looked towards Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu. She felt a pang of guilt, and her eyes were red. She had not managed to expose them. The one who had done so was her father, just like Yi Futian had predicted. Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu did not look at Hong Yi. Yi Futian declared, Anyone who stands in our way will be killed without any mercy. As he said this, the crowd saw a divine body float up into the sky. Hua Jieyu was beside the divine body. A terrifying aura emanated from it, and the great path rumbled. This caused the hearts of the surrounding cultivators to tremble. Let's go, Yi Futian said. Then, both of them stepped up into the sky and left the place. When the cultivators saw them leaving, they were all actually somewhat hesitant. They didn't dare attack them right away. Hold them off. We only need to wait until the Lord's underlings arrive. A deep and powerful voice sounded. A cultivator who was at the peak of the Renhuang plain took a step forward and charged up into the air. Many ancient golden clocks plummeted from the sky, attempting to seal off the space and block Futian and Huajiu from leaving. Futian raised his head and glanced at the clocks. Dong! Dong! The sound of clocks ringing could be heard continuously. Divine light burst forth as all the clocks were shattered into pieces. With a flash, the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor transformed into a beam of golden light and pierced the sky. Dong! The facial expression of the cultivator who was at the peak of the Renhuang plain turned ugly. An enormous ancient clock appeared to protect him. However, the divine light directly penetrated the clock. The ancient clock crumbled, and the cultivator shook violently. Then, he turned into countless specks of light of the great path and dissipated. He had perished. Those who saw this scene all felt their hearts tremble. Futian and Huajiu immediately traversed through the sky and left. For a moment, no one actually dared to get in their way. Chapter 2450 Ambush. In the clouds, two silhouettes traversed through space quickly. They were moving as fast as lightning. Even though Saint Jinchan ordered various cultivators to hunt down Futian, very few could actually stand against him. In the entire Six Desires heavens, Lord Six Desires used to be the only one who could confidently defeat Futian. Lord Yu was a cultivator from Yema heaven, while Lord Liberty was a cultivator from Liberty heaven. How many people among the cultivators beneath Saint Jinchan could be a match for Futian? It was most likely very difficult to catch Futian unless Saint Jinchan, his younger brother Lord Initial Zen, or someone at the same level as them personally pursued Futian. Futian's own ability was enough for him to kill the Renhuang before this. However, with the help of the flesh of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, his speed was even faster. Futian and Huajiu traveled in space, and they had reached another city in the blink of an eye. Right at this moment, a dazzling divine light suddenly shone down. Even the clouds were illuminated as the divine light poured down from the sky above. The scene appeared exceptionally divine. It was as though they had arrived in paradise. At the same time, a mighty aura pressed down and loomed over the vast space. Futian and Huajiu stopped in their tracks. They raised their heads to look at the sky above. The space around them had been transformed into a sealed-off domain. Silhouettes of Buddhas appeared among the golden clouds, enshrouding the sun. Futian was well aware that they were no longer in the main space. Instead, they were currently in the domain of the great path of a top-tier cultivator. They had been intercepted. The sound of Buddha reverberated within the space. Its sound was thunderous. The light of Buddha pierced through the golden clouds. Many faces of Buddhas could be seen in the sky. However, Futian could not detect any cultivators. Buddhist runes and an enormous symbol of one appeared. The symbol grew larger and larger, covering the entire sky. Then, the symbol plummeted, charging towards where Futian and Huajiu were. The symbol of one that blocked out the sun in the sky shone with the light of Buddha. It was as though a heavenly might was charging down to crush all of existence. Futian raised his head and looked at the gigantic symbol that was descending upon him. The divine body raised its hand and pointed at the sky. Immediately, endless sword runes landed on the symbol of Wan, followed by a dull thud reverberating in the space. A terrifying storm swept across the sky. Cracks appeared on the symbol of Wan. It then shattered. It was destroyed with the point of a finger. However, the next moment, the various Buddhas in the sky chanted the sound of Buddha simultaneously. The sound of Buddha circled Futian. It was a Buddhist sound wave attack. The sound formed waves as they swept down and crashed directly into the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. They caused Futian's spiritual soul to tremble. This was the same sound wave attack technique that Lord Initial Zen had used back then. They were clearly from the same sect. These cultivators who were trying to kill him were Saint Jinchan's men. They were most likely from Jinchan Temple and were his direct disciples. However, from the strength of this attack, Yi Futian knew that they were not existences who had experienced the second stage of the divine tribulation of the Great Path. The strongest among them had only survived the first stage. Otherwise, there was no need for them to act this way. It would have been sufficient for them to walk out and attack him directly. If Yi Futian wanted to break through this attack, he had to forcefully shatter this domain. Around the figure of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, a space filled with runes appeared. Each rune seemed to contain the power of path obliteration. This was the way of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. The runes flowed within the space and coalesced into many sword runes. Menacing sword will emanated from them, causing many runic divine swords to appear in the space. The emanating sword light had an astonishing pressure. The space gave off a bone-chilling aura. Yi Futian's mind shifted, and immediately, the will of the space of runes burst forth and became beams of light. It ignored the rupturing of space and attacked the domain directly. It was as though countless beams of light immediately traversed the space and shot directly towards the various silhouettes of Buddhas. Bang! 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 Terrifying sounds could be heard. The various silhouettes of Buddhas in the sky shattered frenziedly. The domain also shattered. The light of Buddha remained, and the figures behind the domain were revealed. In the vast region around Yi Futian, many silhouettes appeared. They all had powerful auras, and there were even a few frightening existences who had experienced the first stage of the divine tribulation of the Great Path among them. Saint Xinchan's position in the Western world was very high. He could be considered one of the giant-level figures who stood at the very top of the realm. There were not many people who were his equals. He had many subordinates in Jinshan Temple. They were one of the most powerful forces in the Western world. Their power rivaled that of the ancient god clan of the Divine Prefecture. Saint Xinchan himself was also a disciple of Buddhism and was considered orthodox in the Western world. That was why he had such a terrifying influence that could send cultivators to kill Yi Futian. The lineup he sent was extremely frightening. The various cultivators spread themselves out as they stared at Yi Futian. A suppressive aura enveloped the region. All of them were unleashing menacing auras. From the previous attack, they briefly experienced how terrifying was the power Yi Futian could release by relying on the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. It was sufficient to kill an existence who survived the first stage of the divine tribulation of the Great Path. No wonder Great Elder Motian had been killed by Yi Futian. The four lords had also fallen to his schemes, 2 of them perishing and another 2 severely injured. Hence, even though their lineup now was extremely powerful, the cultivators from Jinshan Temple were still very cautious. They did not dare underestimate Yi Futian at the slightest. Yi Futian had single-handedly destroyed the 6 Desires Heavenly Palace. How could they take such an existence lightly? If you follow us to Jinshan Temple, you might have a chance of survival. If you cooperate, Saint Xinchan might forgive you, someone among the cultivators said. This person was grabbed in golden robes like battle armor. A beam of golden light actually emanated from his glabella as though it was an eye. It seemed as though it would open at any given moment. It gave off an eerie feeling. Yi Futian laughed coldly and sighed. He had experienced all this before. The cultivators of the world were mostly the same. Be it in the Western world or the Divine Prefecture, a man's wealth was his own ruin by causing the greed of others. Yi Futian possessed the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, and the teachings of the Great Emperors. It was difficult for others not to covet what he had. Hence, he naturally did not trust anyone. Moreover, he had killed the junior of Saint Xinchan, Lord Initial Zen. Even if Saint Xinchan did not kill him, Yi Futian would still be imprisoned for life and be forced to surrender all he had. Why would he choose this path to his doom? Yi Futian did not respond to the other party. The space of runes appeared, and countless runes shone. An astonishing intent of battle radiated out from the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. You do not know what is good for yourself, the person who had spoken to Yi Futian said in a cold tone. As he said this, as expected, the golden mark on his glabella lit up. It was as though a heavenly eye had opened. Immediately, a beam of menacing light shot straight out and landed on the figure of Xinjiao the Great Emperor that Yi Futian was controlling. As this light shone on it, the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor seemed to be sealed by some power. The light formed its own domain. Chapter 2451 No Bars Hold. No matter how Xinjiao the Great Emperor moved his body, he was always wrapped up within the divine light. At the same time, an extremely dangerous aura descended, and Yi Futian's spiritual soul could clearly feel the threat. Psst! A sharp sound was heard, and a beam of light that could tear through everything now shot out from the heavenly eye. It was invincible, containing the most terrifying space-tearing power. It directly slammed towards the divine body. Boom! In an instant, the attack descended on the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, causing the divine body to tremble. It even took a step or two backward. Go for it! Someone called out as an overbearing power of the great path shrouded the area where Yi Futian and Hua Jiayu were. However, right at this moment, a violent roar was heard. It seemed to come from the divine body itself. The body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor not only stopped moving backward but lurched forward abruptly, carrying the space-tearing light beam forcefully forward, rushing to those cultivators who were in the void. Open! The divine eye at the man's brow chakra opened wide. A divine light of destruction shot out from it suddenly as if it meant to tear this space apart. Appalling golden traces appeared in the void, moving madly towards Yi Futian. Xinjiao the Great Emperor did not retreat, however. His entire body was surrounded by the divine light, which served to protect the divine body. At the same time, his finger followed the beam of light to point upward. Another space-tearing divine light bloomed, turning into a sword. The sword collided with the divine light that came down for the kill, immediately destroying the beam of light. Careful! The other cultivators cautioned when they saw that the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was moving into the sky along the beam of light. After all, Yi Futian was able to kill Great Elder Matian with a single sword strike before. And there was no doubt whatsoever regarding the Great Elder's combat effectiveness. Bang! However, that cultivator with the heavenly eye seemed to be without fear, even itching to collide with the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. He stepped down. Behind him came a massive and boundless divine shadow. It appeared above the sky. From above the infinite void, a divine light projected down, splitting the sky apart. When that heavenly eye of his was looking down, a devastating storm appeared from the firmament and blew down below. Yi Futian, however, was walking through this storm. A golden divine halberd appeared in the hands of the cultivator with the heavenly eye, puffing out unparalleled divine brilliance. Buzz! His figure flashed, and the gigantic divine shadow behind him was also moving with him. In this domain of the heavenly eye, it was as if his power of the great path could erupt to reach its maximum potential. This was his domain world, and he was its master. In this realm of the heavenly eye, he was the king. According to legend, the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was unparalleled and was one of the most powerful existences in ancient times. Now, while it was controlled by a youngster, it had managed to slay the Great Elder of Matian. He wanted to see for himself just how strong the body might be. Two rays of light rushed towards each other. Even though they were far apart, at this moment, the distance seemed to be non-existent. There were no human shapes that could be detected, only the light was visible. In an instant, the two figures collided. The divine halberd pierced the finger of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, and this finger was the sharpest sword in the world right now. The divine light of destruction swept across the space, setting off a terrifying storm around it. It radiated into the boundless space, even to the extremely remote land. Countless cultivators looked up into the sky at this moment, but almost instantly, they began to flee frantically. The aftermath of the storm swept towards them, destroying any existence within its reach. In the area of collision, the divine light seemed to explode. The two figures separated, and Yi Futian was knocked backward, but the other muffled a groan. A trace of golden blood seemed to seep out from the eye that appeared in the brow chakra, and his face was a bit distorted. That cultivator endured severe pain and made a hissing noise to express his pain. Before Yi Futian was able to stop himself, a massive figure of Arhat suddenly appeared above him. It turned into a domain of the great path and covered him. This Arhat was in a reclining position, appearing as a sleeping Arhat. With the sound of Buddha, Futian, who was within the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, felt drowsy all of a sudden. It seemed as if he was about to fall into a dream. Hua Jieyu, who was guarding behind him, also felt the onset of sudden drowsiness. Her mind was groggy, filled with only the shadows of the sleeping Arhat. It seemed as if there was nothing else to do except follow suit and fall into a deep sleep. Futian's guard heightened. In Buddhism, the sleeping Arhat was not an offensive ability for attacking purposes, but that didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. It could lead its targets to fall into a deep sleep, from which they could not awake on their own. Once the targets entered slumber, they were under the other's control completely, with no hope of ever awakening on their own. Right at this moment, sounds of rhythm were heard. A guqin appeared in the void, and upon the guqin, a series of musical notes bounced out, permeating between heaven and earth. Suddenly there was a strong sense of sadness that instantly expelled the sleepiness. Even the cultivators in the void felt that powerful sadness. Boom! A horrific sound came out while the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor faced forward. Under the rhythm of the divine requiem, infinite runes erupted from the divine body enveloped the boundless space. Soon after, a number of divine monuments appeared above the sky. It was as if they were made from the runes. They fell down continuously. Even more frightening was that a door now appeared above the firmament, coming from the outer sky. It was like an ancient divine door that was capable of suppressing everything in the world. Clearly, Futian's control over the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was becoming stronger. Every time he fought with the power of the divine body, it inevitably took a heavy toll on his body which required considerable time to recover. However, his suitability with the divine body was obviously getting better each time. Now, he was able to use the power from the divine body to enhance the divine methods he cultivated. The power of Gate of World Suppression was particularly explosive, using the divine power of path obliteration within the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. There was no telling how powerful it might be in its ultimate form. Above the firmament, those cultivators from Jinshan Temple, when they felt that divine might, also felt their hearts skip a beat. They had an unpleasant premonition. "You guys evacuate first," a cultivator who had survived the first divine tribulation of the Great Path proposed, ordering those Renhuang who had not yet experienced the divine tribulation to withdraw. Obviously, they all felt a serious threat. In the distance, at different positions in the void, all these Renhuang began to retreat. However, horrible rumbling sounds came out, as the Gate of World Suppression attacked the infinite divine monuments. As they rained down, this corner of the sky was completely covered, along with the entire vast expanse. There was, in fact, nowhere to escape in this world. Those Renhuang cultivators were releasing their own power of the Great Path now. The powers blasted towards the divine monuments that came at them from above. But the divine monuments were even more terrifying when coupled with Futian's own strength. The Gate of World Suppression, as unleashed by Futian, would be difficult enough for these Renhuang to block. But now, as urged with the divine body's path obliteration power, it was nearly impossible. Bang, bang, bang. A series of terrifying sounds were heard, and many Renhuang were killed on the spot, as they could not block Futian's attack. Then, more Renhuang fell one after another until, in a blink of an eye, more than half of the cultivators who had arrived were either killed or injured. The divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was suspended in midair, the divine light shining all over it. The scene was mighty beyond words. Futian, who had been pressured time and time again by these people, finally unleashed all the power within his disposal. He was ready to do his worst. Chapter 2452 Attack. After this blow landed, the cultivators who had been closing in on Futian were knocked even farther back. Some cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path was retreating due to the injuries he received. When the Gate of World Suppression blasted towards him, he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was as if all his internal organs had been greatly impacted. Terrible rumbling sounds emerged as infinite runes surrounded heaven and earth. Its coercion was overwhelming. Futian looked in a direction and saw that the cultivator from before with the heavenly eye now wanted to get a piece of him. Xinjiao the Great Emperor raised his arm, and immediately, the infinite runes gathered together. Each rune was a character that spelled out sword, and they surrounded the divine body. An aura of path obliteration permeated the entire area. Then, Futian pointed in the direction of the man. In an instant, the infinite runes rolled forward and submerged the space. A divine sword appeared to pierce through heaven and the earth. As soon as the man felt that something was amiss, his body flew into rapid retreat at an unimaginable speed. At the same time, the heavenly eye in his brow chakra shot out at Futian again. However, this time, the skyful of runes swept at him directly, forcing the divine light from the heavenly eye to flow back from where it came. That sword strike ignored the distance as it locked onto its opponent, and chased him into the far distance. The cultivator with the heavenly eye knew that there was nowhere for him to run. As he let out a mighty shout, the divine light in the heavenly eye was released to the extreme, and he threw the divine halberd in his hand forward again. A beam of light seemed to penetrate through heaven and earth, just like before, and the two attacks collided again. But this time, the strike that Futian unleashed seemed to be far stronger than before. The destructive runes directly flooded the space and pushed towards him. This time, everything was destroyed, and the divine light that bloomed from the heavenly eye was also retreating. His body retreated like a stream of light. It was not because he took the initiative to move back, but that he was being pushed back by that terrifying force. He let out an angry roar. The divine light from the heavenly eye submerged the runes of swordsmanship in the front. It almost succeeded in blocking the momentum of the attack. Boom! There was a terrifying sound, and a storm of destruction raged in the space. His body was still moving in retreat, but he was somewhat relieved to see that the attack in front of him had gradually weakened. It seemed that he was still able to intercept this blow. "Watch out!" someone exclaimed from a distance. Futian's heart skipped a beat when he heard it. Then, he saw a golden divine light directly shooting at him from the front. He could hardly see what it was. As the light was getting closer, it descended instantly in front of him, overlapping with the attacking divine sword as the two became one. Buzz! The light penetrated without much resistance, piercing through the light beam from the heavenly eye. He felt a sharp pain in his brow chakra, and a figure appeared in front of him. It was the divine body of Xinjiao, the great emperor. He placed his finger right on the heavenly eye of his brow chakra. At this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. No! As he squeezed out this last protest, his body was shattered. His soul and spirit were scattered and then destroyed. An existence who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path was killed right on the spot. All of this seemed like an uncanny instance of déjà vu, reminiscent of when Great Elder of Motian had been killed. Both had been pierced by a simple sword strike and had perished. This place was quite far from the previous battlefield, but spatial distance was nothing to cultivators of this level. After witnessing the fall of the cultivator with the heavenly eye, the others trembled fiercely. They seemed to have underestimated the prowess of Futian. The sleeping Arhut could not influence his combat effectiveness, either could the heavenly eye when it came to restraining him. It had not been long since the fighting started, and there were already heavy casualties. Futian turned his head and looked at them with chilling eyes. "Whoever keeps on chasing us will not be spared," he said menacingly. When his voice faded, he took Hua Jiayu into a stream of light and continued moving ahead without killing any other cultivators. Although he was the one who started the killing spree, it was not his objective. Right now, he wanted to leave and get out of this mess as soon as possible. A sustained fight would take more time. For him, it meant an increased degree of danger, which he was not willing to risk. Naturally, he wanted to leave as quickly as he possibly could. Those cultivators did not continue to pursue him after he left. Obviously, the short battle they were engaged in gave them a much clearer idea of Futian's combat effectiveness. With the help of the divine body, prolonged engagement in battle would only spell their own deaths, even if they joined their power. Futian didn't kill them because he didn't have time. Also, he was worried about the arrival of more powerful individuals. Because of this, he was in a hurry to leave. "What should we do?" a cultivator asked at this time. They gave chase here and had been slaughtered by Futian. Now, they had allowed him to leave, so they could not possibly reveal their failed attempt if he were to re-emerge. They had lost a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, as well as many top Renhuang. The loss they suffered was not easily ignored. "What can we do?" asked someone. Another person replied, "We lack in strength, so what can we do? All we can do is go back and admit guilt, but it won't be that easy for him to just walk away there." The person next to him nodded in agreement. Although Saint Jinchan would not make a move himself, top-level cultivators were already on the way. Yi Futian had slaughtered so many cultivators from Jinchan Temple, it would be unrealistic to think that he could get away unscathed. Never mind that Yi Futian was still inside the territory of the Six Desires Heaven. Even if he managed to escape from Six Desires Heaven somehow, he would be mistaken to think that would be the end of the matter. "Let's go back," another person said. Everyone turned around to levitate into the sky. However, they appeared rather beaten, as this defeat made them feel rather frustrated. They had come with such a powerful group and thought that they had Yi Futian well in hand. But they would now return with such a heavy loss and without their intended subject. It was all very discouraging. People at this level always thought highly of themselves. After all, they were already at the top of the cultivational world, but this world had been turned upside down by a youngster. After they left, many people came to the battlefield here. A lot of them were shocked. They had all witnessed the terrifying battle that took place in the void and gathered that it must be the person that Saint Jinchan had issued a kill order, but they could never suspect the person was this powerful. The storm that Yi Futian caused in Six Desires Heaven was indeed terrifying, and it had thrown things into disarray. First, he killed the great elder of Mautian, and then caused the destruction of Six Desires Heavenly Palace, and the deaths of Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen. Now Jinchan Temple had ordered a thorough search of the entire Six Desires Heaven to pursue him until he was apprehended. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had managed to shock the entire Six Desires Heaven all on his own. But Yi Futian didn't think so much about all that at the moment. He was still en route in his escape. Although he had killed many cultivators, he did not dare to be careless, moving fast in the direction away from Six Desires Heaven. Right now, he was still in the territory under Saint Jinchan's control, and it was imperative for him to leave as soon as possible. He didn't feel great. On the contrary, he had a sickening premonition. The prior interception of those cultivators meant that they still had a way to locate him. If someone else at the Lord level arrived, he would be in imminent danger. Although he had become even more adept at controlling the divine body, it was still a tall order for him to fight against the top cultivator at the Lord level. Once he was intercepted by someone at this level, it would become a matter of life and death. Chapter 2453 No Way Up to Heaven. Yi Futian flew as high as he could so that he would be an even smaller target. In the midst of clouds, the golden divine light appeared like lightning. This was the first time he was moving with such urgency. Every time he shuttled through the void, a hint of golden brilliance was left behind in the clouds and mist, leaving traces. Even a faint aura of the Great Path remained, holding with some residual information. But this was unavoidable. In order to move as fast as he could, he had to resort to using the power of the Great Path. Unless he continued to hide in the house as before, but even that seemed futile now. Saint Jinchan had ordered all of Six Desires Heaven to be searched. Images of Yi Futian were posted everywhere. The vast majority of the cultivators in Six Desires Heaven probably knew of their existence already. If they appeared anywhere they could be seen, they risked being exposed, increasing the danger they were already in. Time passed, and Yi Futian had no idea how long it had been. But he had a feeling of doom. This feeling was completely without reason, yet it made him more than a little uncomfortable. "Jiayu, I will send you down there. Then, let's separate," Yi Futian proposed to Hua Jiayu, who was beside him. The person Jinchan Temple wanted was him. If they went on their separate ways, they would only follow him, not Hua Jiayu. Hua Jiayu looked at his eyes and shook her head. At times like this, there was no way for her to leave Yi Futian. They both understood that the events they had experienced before were largely due to their incredible luck. It was Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen's carelessness that caused them to fall into the trap Futian had set out for them. But now, if he were really taken by the people from Jinshan Temple, his luck wouldn't continue as before. Saint Jinshan would, no doubt, make sure that he would stay under his thumb. Moreover, Saint Jinshan was someone higher in status than both Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen, so it was safe to assume that his strength far exceeded their own. If Futian were captured, there would be no way up to heaven and no way down to hell either. At times like this, she had no desire to go anywhere else. All she wanted to do was share his fate with him. Whether they lived or died, at least they would be together. Looking at the expression in Hua Jiayu's eyes, Futian knew that he couldn't persuade her, so he resolved to hurry forward. That ill-fated feeling became stronger as time went by. Gradually, he had a vague sense that someone was tagging along. More importantly, this feeling was getting stronger. He keenly realized that he had been tracked down, and that a top cultivator was spying on him. Unexpectedly, there was yet another top-ranking lord. It seemed that he had underestimated Jinshan Temple. However, the other party didn't seem to be in a hurry to do anything, content with keeping tabs on him for now. This made him feel terribly uneasy. Futian knew that even though he was currently in control of Xinjiao the Great Emperor's divine body, it was draining his energy. His realm was limited, and the strength of his spiritual soul was also limited. Since he was unable to fully control the divine body, he did so by consuming the power of his spiritual soul nonstop. The longer this whole affair dragged out, the weaker he would be in the future. Futian could feel that the one who was tracking him was not overly eager. As long as he was under his watch and did not escape, it was enough for the moment. This time, a top-notch figure didn't show any impatience. Futian understood why he had such an ominous premonition. Finally, Futian stopped moving forward, but the feeling of being followed remained. He knew he couldn't get rid of the cultivator who was hiding in the dark, so he simply stopped. The body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor stood in the clouds as mist while Futian surveyed their surroundings. He released his divine consciousness and vaguely felt a powerful aura, though he could not detect its source. Since the elder has already arrived, why continue lurking in the dark? Why not show yourself? Futian said as if to no one in particular. Benevolence! The response was only one word. Golden light was shining everywhere. A figure appeared in the sky above Futian, bathing in the golden divine light. The figure that appeared there was rather corpulent. One could even describe him as someone with a rather fat head and copious ears. The man's head was shaved, like a monk's, but he was not really a monk. His whole body was shining with golden lights. It was hard to imagine that such a portly man could manage speed so fast that he was able to find Futian and stay on his tail. Is Elder also from Jinshan Temple? Futian asked, still holding a slight sense of hope in his heart. The fat man smiled and nodded slightly. Not only did he come from Jinshan Temple, but he was the number 2 person in charge of Jinshan Temple, the deputy lord of Jinshan Temple. Even Lord Initial Zen had to pay proper respect to him when he saw the man. Although this operation had been ordered by Saint Jinshan, it was, in fact, supervised by the fat man. It was no surprise that he was the first person to track down Futian. How about you come to Jinshan Temple with me? Lord Blubber said to Futian with a smile. He spoke just like a friend. His tone was calm and casual, not showing the slightest maliciousness. It seemed that the whole thing was a friendly invitation. You have to forgive me. I can't, Futian replied. If you don't go by yourself, then you will leave me no choice but to force my hand. Why do you want to do that? It would be extremely unwise. The man continued to advocate for his cause, but Futian looked at him and responded, You leave me no other choice. How much strength can you borrow from the divine body? Lord Blubber asked again. Whatever it is, it will be hard-pressed to compete with you, Elder, Futian replied. If that's the case, then why do you continue to resist? The other man exhorted. Take a walk with me, and perhaps those who around you may stay safe. If you don't comply, I will have no choice but to take action. If, by chance, the goddess next to you gets hurt, it would be very unfortunate. Futian frowned. This Lord Blubber seemed to be friendly and amicable on the outside, always speaking with a smile on his face, but his words suggested he was definitely not some gentle, harmless creature. On the contrary, he may very well be a plotting, scheming, ruthless snake, as he was now threatening Futian by using Huajieyu. Futian lowered his head to look at Huajieyu, who was next to him. The two looked at each other. He could see that there was no fear in her eyes. Now, all they could do was face this problem calmly and openly. Elder, please make a move if you must. Futian raised his head again and said to Lord Blubber, who was in the sky. As you wish. The other responded and proceeded to clasp his plump hands together. In an instant, the entire firmament shook violently. In this area high above, an incomparably radiant light of Buddha manifested as if to block off all other heavens, and created a world that was on its own. Numerous massive and boundless symbols of Wan had completely shut down this corner of the sky. These symbols of Wan interlocked and turned into a giant hole. The symbol continued to circle the firmament, accompanied by terrible booming sounds. The sky seemed to be on the verge of collapse, but Futian and Huajieyu stood there without moving. They could feel shockwaves running through their bodies constantly. Futian could clearly feel that the symbol of Wan, as released by the cultivator in front of him, was completely different from the symbol of Wan he had endured before. The difference was more than a little. Under the symbol of Wan, everything had no choice but to be crushed. Boom! Along with the descent of a terrifying divine light, this symbol of Wan spiraled down at an incredible speed. It was as if a light had hit Futian's head. Xinjiao the Great Emperor was radiant all over. Futian pointed his finger at the sky, and countless runes of swordsmanship appeared, attempting to break through the supreme pressure from the symbol of Wan just like before. But this time, the sword will could not penetrate and smash through it. It ended with the runes of the sword characters being totally destroyed. With a loud boom, the divine body shook and fell from the sky. On the other hand, a series of symbols of Wan came down from the void as if trying to suppress everything in this world. Chapter 2454 No Way Down to Hell. Many symbols of Wan descended, layer upon layer. It was as if each layer contained infinite supreme powers capable of suppressing the Great Path. They were descending continuously upon the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor. Boom, boom, boom! The divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was being blasted continuously by those madly falling symbols. The spiritual soul inside his body was rocked. Even Huajieyu, who he was protecting behind him, was also shaken. Finally, the divine body stopped as it had nowhere to retreat. Both of his legs fell on the symbol of Wan. This entire space was full of symbols of Wan. The same held true for the space below. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go. Heavy forces of thousandfold continued to blast down from above, causing the divine body to let out a frightening roar. Futian controlled the divine body, making it raise both hands. It pushed against a giant symbol of Wan. When each symbol fell, it shook the divine body vigorously. Even his spiritual soul trembled because of it. Lord Blubber had no intention to stop his attack. Every blow he dealt was tens of millions times more powerful than anticipated, chipping away Futian's ability to resist. Gradually, the whole divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor was bent and could no longer stand up straight. If this were not a divine body but a body of flesh and blood, perhaps it would have already collapsed and shattered. There was no way it could have endured all those attacks and lasted until now. When the last symbol of Wan fell, a terrifying force swept out. Futian muffled a groan as his spiritual soul bore a terribly heavy load. Above the void, Lord Blubber lowered his head to glance down below. His objective was to capture Futian alive, not kill him, so he would have to pay close attention not to be too heavy-handed. If he accidentally smashed Futian's spiritual soul, it would be a terrible mistake. Futian was still in control of the inheritances of several great emperors. He had already slaughtered many cultivators from Jinshan Temple, so they needed to squeeze Futian for all his worth. Otherwise, how could they possibly justify the deaths of all those cultivators? Therefore, he would be careful and measured as not to obliterate Yi Futian right away. Now, will you go with me? Lord Blubber lowered his head and said to Yi Futian. Yi Futian looked at the figure in the void and felt a little hopeless. The power of someone who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, whose control over the power of the Great Path had already surpassed any common sense of the word, was overwhelming. Even though he possessed the power of path obliteration, Lord Blubber was still indestructible. This was completely determined by the difference between their realms. If he had also survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, then with the help of the divine body, he should have no issue dealing with a figure at this level. But now, it was obviously too difficult. He lowered his head and glanced at Hua Jiayu. Even if the two were to become one, it would be hard for them to deal with a Lord-level character, and their outcome would still be hopeless. Let her leave, and I will go with you to Jinshan Temple, Yi Futian said. No. Hua Jiayu refused when she heard Yi Futian's words. Jiayu, I will go alone. There is still one last chance. If you are with me, I will be too worried, Yi Futian said to Hua Jiayu via voice transmission. His tone was very solemn. Previously, he had wanted to let Hua Jiayu leave while they were on the road. But at that time, the ending was unknown, and they thought they might have a chance to escape 6 Desires Heaven together. However, now that he had been intercepted by someone at the Lord level, he couldn't leave. However, Yi Futian still had hopes that Hua Jiayu could get away. If he went to Jinshan Temple by himself, he might still have a chance to fight for his life. Lord Blubber glanced at Yi Futian and Hua Jiayu, then said with a smile, Come out of the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor and submit to me, then we will talk. Previously, Yi Futian had plotted against many people. The 4 lords, dead or injured, had all paid a heavy price. Now, even though he was always smiling as he dealt with Yi Futian, Lord Blubber was still alert. Although he had completely suppressed the other and currently had the upper hand, he dared not let down his guard. He didn't mind Hua Jiayu leaving, but he needed to be absolutely sure that he had Yi Futian under control before that happens. Only when Yi Futian had completely relinquished the power of the divine body could he be under his control. With Lord Blubber's own realm, facing a Renhuang of the 8th realm would be like a god facing a mortal. He could easily crush Yi Futian and not worry about him making any more waves. Yi Futian didn't look too great when he heard what the other said. Lord Blubber seemed to intend on controlling him completely, and have him surrender the divine body. If that happened, then no matter what happened, Yi Futian would no longer have any advantage, and would really be akin to some lowly insect in front of Lord Blubber. No, Yi Futian refused without hesitation. If this is the case, and Elder reneges, I won't stand a chance. Do you think you have a chance now? Lord Blubber asked with a smile. If so, let us continue. As soon as his voice fell, a terrifying aura descended once more, and the domain of the Great Path released a terrifying divine light. The symbol of Wan was shining with radiant divine light, pressing downward, layer by layer, with overwhelming coercion. If Elder insists, then you can be sure I will never go to Jinshan Temple no matter the cost, even if my life ends here today. And before I die, I will destroy the vitality within the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor, Yi Futian said with no uncertainty. This way, Jinshan Temple will have nothing to gain. Lord Blubber raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard Yi Futian's words. Could Yi Futian really destroy the vitality within the body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor? Xinjiao the Great Emperor had long perished, but the divine body he left behind still contained divine power, which could also be considered its vitality. After Yi Futian had assumed control over the Great Emperor's body, he was able to urge the divine body and the divine power therein. However, if he were really to destroy the vitality, could that really destroy the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor? However, Yi Futian was a cunning character, and everything that happened before proved that. How credible were his words! But even if he had doubts, he didn't quite have the resolve to make a decision right now. What if it was true? More importantly, Yi Futian's life was far more valuable than Hua Jiayu's. He actually didn't care much about Hua Jiayu. As far as Jinshan Temple was concerned, she was unimportant. However, the presence of Hua Jieyu would allow them to control Yi Futian better. But just at this moment, another terrifying divine light descended from above the firmament. A brilliant beam of light came down directly from outside of the sky, covering the body of Xinjia, the great emperor. The power of heavenly might dropped, which changed the look in the eyes of Yi Futian. This aura was even mightier than Lord Blubber's. An even stronger character had now arrived. Lord Blubber raised his head to look beyond the sky at this moment. The smile in his eyes was replaced by a solemn expression. In the next moment, a group of godlike figures appeared where the divine light was shining. The middle-aged man in the lead had a superior temperament. He was clad in a long golden robe, and he had pitch-black long black hair. Nonetheless, he was surrounded by a detectable air of Buddhism. The golden light was shining in an extremely radiant display around him, and he exuded an unparalleled majesty and authority. "My lord." Lord Blubber nodded to acknowledge the middle-aged man who appeared in the void, making Yi Futian's heart tremble. The Lord of Jinshan Temple, Saint Jinshan, had come in person. A golden halo seemed to be hovering behind him, giving an irresistible sense of might. He looked like a true heavenly god. The cultivators who came with him were also extraordinary characters, standing quietly behind him and looking down at Yi Futian below. Yi Futian couldn't help but let out a sigh. They must have thought highly of him to dispatch such a group of cultivators to deal with him. Chapter 2455 No Choice. Yi Futian naturally understood that Saint Jinshan had come here. Yi Futian could also tell how highly the latter viewed him. He would not stop until he took down Yi Futian. When Yi Futian was under the control of Lord Six Desires in the Six Desires Heavenly Palace, Saint Jinshan had merely sent messengers to ask that Yi Futian be sent over to Jinshan Temple. Saint Jinshan's attitude was overbearing, and he clearly did not treat the Six Desires Heavenly Palace as an equal. Now, he had come in person to take Yi Futian back with him. Yi Futian did not know whether or not he should feel honored. "Greetings, Senior Saint Jinshan," Yi Futian greeted as he looked at Saint Jinshan in the sky. Although Saint Jinshan was his opponent, he still minded his manners. However, Saint Jinshan was not as friendly as Yi Futian was. He gazed down at the figure below. A cold look flashed past in his domineering gaze as he said, "I never thought that Lord Initial Zen would perish to you." Saint Jinshan did not care as to whether Lord Six Desires was dead or alive. However, Lord Initial Zen was considered his junior, and was a figure at the level of a lord. He had fallen to Yi Futian's scheme and perished. If Yi Futian did not possess so many secrets, Saint Jinshan would have killed Yi Futian with a single palm strike. However, he would not do so. Yi Futian still had value. At least for now, he would not kill Yi Futian. "Senior Lord Initial Zen had me against the wall. I had no choice," replied Yi Futian. Saint Jinshan naturally ignored Yi Futian's explanation. He swept a cold and indifferent gaze at Yi Futian and calmly ordered, "Take him away." As he said this, Lord Blubber's smile returned. He said to Yi Futian, "Yi Futian, let's go." As he said this, two top-tier Renhuangs descended and walked towards Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu. Their figures floated in the sky above Yi Futian as they said, "Your spiritual soul may return to its original body." They said this with a commanding tone. There was no room for negotiation. Although Yi Futian was powerful and could kill existences who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, Saint Jinshan had come in person. Right now, he did not dare to resist. That would be suicidal. Under such circumstances, Yi Futian had no choice but to obey and follow them to Jinshan Temple. For Yi Futian, he was indeed in dire straits. There was nowhere to run now. If he obeyed and followed the other party, how would he end up? Hua Jieyu and his fate would be beyond their control. They would be at the mercy of the other party's whims. Yi Futian had also killed many cultivators from Jinshan Temple. Would the other party spare him? Clearly, this was the path to his doom. On the other hand, if he did not follow the other party, how would he deal with the situation at hand? Right now, he was in danger of being killed off. Right now, at this very moment, it seemed that he had reached the end of the line. He raised his head and looked at the Renhuangs in the sky. They had imposing and overbearing manners. When they faced him, these Renhuangs from Jinshan Temple bore an air of arrogance. It seemed to be their innate temperament. It might also be because they were from Jinshan Temple that they acted so high and mighty. In the sky, various cultivators looked down at them as though they were enjoying a show. Their expressions were cold and indifferent. There was even a look of pity in their eyes, as though they felt sorry for him. Lord Blubber was still smiling as though he had been doing so forever. Saint Jinshan did not even look at Futian, instead turning his back to him. It seemed that he was prepared to leave. No one believed that Futian would refuse and resist. They were all waiting for one outcome, for Futian to disarm himself and obediently follow them to Jinshan Temple. Futian suddenly realized that the reason the almighty Saint Jinshan had come in person, aside from how highly he viewed Futian, was not because he was worried that Lord Blubber could not bring Futian back with him. Saint Jinshan might be worried that Lord Blubber would have his own personal agenda. Hence, he had come in person. Everything around him seemed to pause. Inside the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, Futian quietly observed all of this as he gradually calmed down. From the look in his eyes, he actually seemed to gradually ease up. It was as though he would calmly accept any outcome. Since it had come to this, everything else was meaningless. Saint Jinshan, ever since I arrived in the Western world, everything I did was because my hand was forced. If I willingly hand over the divine body, would you promise to let us two leave? Futian asked. His voice was extremely calm at this moment. With Saint Jinshan standing, in such a situation before the various cultivators, he would not lie to Futian. Hence, he asked this final question. It was to give himself an opportunity. Are you qualified to negotiate with me? Saint Jinshan answered Futian with his back turned towards the latter. His tone was indifferent, without the slightest hint of emotion. Futian was not qualified to negotiate with him. Take him away, Saint Jinshan mumbled. Immediately, the two Renhuangs gazed down at Futian and ordered, "Make haste." Futian raised his head and swept a glance at them. They were both top-tier Renhuangs and would be considered extraordinary figures wherever they went. They belonged to the group of individuals who stood at the top of the pyramid. However, right now, Futian's eyes were filled with a look of cold disdain. Weren't they relying on Saint Jinshan's power to throw their weight around? If it was just these two Renhuangs without the backing of Saint Jinshan, would they dare act this way to him? Even if Futian did not rely on the divine body, killing them both would be child's play. Are the two of you even qualified to order me around? Said Futian. He glanced at the two Renhuangs as ferocious divine light shone from his eyes. Countless runes radiated out from the divine body. In an instant, the two Renhuangs felt themselves descending into the domain of path obliteration. Their expressions changed drastically. However, it was already too late. Futian immediately raised his hand and clenched his fist. A gigantic hand directly reached out and subdued the two Renhuangs. Beneath the terrifying gigantic hand, the two of them did not have the strength to free themselves at all. Presumptuous! A cultivator in the air chided angrily. Futian actually dared to resist and attack the Renhuangs who were to lead him away. Was he seeking his own death? Under such circumstances, Futian was actually still resisting? By following them, there was at least a chance for a different ending for him. However, he was now resisting. Even if he was not concerned about himself, had he not considered the well-being of his woman? Saint Jinshan also turned around. He clearly had not imagined that Futian would resist now. I told you that everything that I have done since I came to Six Desires Heaven was because I was forced to, Futian said in a voice as cold as ice. He then clenched his fist. A frightening rumbling sound could be heard. The two Renhuangs let out horrifying screams. They immediately perished to the giant hand and were executed on the spot. In an instant, terrifying auras descended and enveloped the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. Even the smile on Lord Blubber's face had disappeared. He appeared somewhat surprised. They were surprised why Futian could not read the room and had actually resisted in such a situation. He had even gotten violent and committed murder. Did he wish to be killed? Saint Xinchan's overbearing gaze turned cold. Yi Futian had actually killed his subordinates right before his eyes. Heavenly might descended. At that moment, the space was filled with endless murderous intent. It made others feel as though their spiritual souls were suffocating. Chapter 2456 Destroy. You're seeking your own death. Saint Xinchan gazed down below as he said this in a voice as cold as ice. When he said this, he made a grab at the space down below. Immediately, a gigantic Buddhist palm appeared in the sky. It radiated with divine halos and enshrouded the sun. The entire space was within the palm's reach. This enormous palm tried to grab the body of Xinjia, the great emperor. The body of Xinjia, the great emperor, shone brilliantly as endless runes leaped around it. The runes enveloped Yi Futian and Hua Jieyu, forming a protective shroud. Rumble! The gigantic palm smacked down. The runes transformed into a starlight screen, as though the divine body was encircled by stars. However, the screen still could not block the terrifying attack of the palm. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the screen slowly shattered. The gigantic palm grasped the divine body of Xinjia, the great emperor, and lifted it toward where Saint Xinchan was. To the side, Lord Blubber cast a glance at the scene indifferently. He was expressionless. Yi Futian indeed did not know what was good for himself. If he allowed himself to be captured and brought away, he would at least have a chance of survival even though he would suffer severe losses. He could still bet on a chance of negotiating some terms with Saint Xinchan. However, Yi Futian chose to oppose Saint Xinchan blatantly. He actually killed 2 renhuangs in front of everyone. His act was no different from leaving himself no way out. What he did was definitely unwise. If this continued, it would most likely not end well for both him and Hua Jieyu. Before this, Lord Blubber had believed that Yi Futian was smart. However, right now, he was obviously a bit unwise. The divine body of Xinjia, the great emperor, was grabbed and dragged up. The gigantic palm retracted and appeared below Saint Xinchan. He lowered his head and looked at Yi Futian, who was grabbed by the gigantic palm. In a cold and indifferent tone, he said, "Will you come out on your own accord, or do you need me to force you out?" Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the majestic figure. An extremely cold light shot out from the eyes of Xinjia, the great emperor. It seemed to bear a look of decisiveness. "Jieyu!" Yi Futian called out to Hua Jieyu as he turned back and looked at her. Hua Jieyu smiled and nodded her head. There was only a calm look on her face that was as beautiful as that of a goddess. There was no sign of the terror of meeting their end on her face. It was obvious that she, like Yi Futian, was already prepared to face anything. Since it had come to this, she would let Yi Futian choose what to do. Regardless of what he wanted to do or what the outcome would be, she was willing to follow him and bear the consequences together with him, even if the outcome might be death. However, they had no choice in this. All of this was because Saint Xinchan had them against the wall. Yi Futian turned back and looked up into the sky. Frightening rumbling sounds could be heard. The defensive light shroud was still shattering in the gigantic palm. However, at the same time, an unparalleled power burst forth from inside the divine body of Xinjia, the great emperor. Beams of divine light shot out from inside the divine body, growing brighter. When Saint Xinchan saw this scene, he coldly snorted. He suddenly clenched his fist forcefully. The defensive light shroud immediately shattered. The fist continued clenching, closing in on the divine body. At that moment, the terrifying divine light that shot out from inside the divine body actually made it difficult for the gigantic hand to continue closing. There were even signs that the hand would be pierced through. This made Saint Xinchan frown. Yi Futian could break through his attack? Rumble. A terrifying sound could be heard. The divine body seemed to go berserk. As divine light shot out, the divine body was actually growing larger. This scene caused Saint Xinchan and Lord Blubber to reveal strange expressions. Prior to this, they had never heard of the divine body expanding in size before. What was Yi Futian doing? Right now, inside the body of Xinjia, the great emperor, Yi Futian's spiritual soul transformed into an ancient tree and seeped into every part of the divine body. An illusory figure flashed inside the body. The illusory figure was none other than Futian. He revealed a look of agony as he howled with a gruff voice. Menacing rumbling sounds could be heard continuously. The world inside the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor expanded frenziedly. Countless years ago, Xinjia the Great Emperor was indestructible after he had proven his way. After he passed away, he left behind his divine body. The divine body was the flesh of a deity. At the same time, it was also an independent world on its own. Outside of the body, the radiating divine light tore apart all existence. The gigantic palm instantly crumbled to dust. Countless runes enveloped the vast space and enshrouded the sun. Both Saint Jinchan and Lord Blubber were trapped within the runes. Of course, trapped along with them within the runes were all the cultivators from Jinchan Temple. Saint Jinchan's brows furrowed. A divine figure appeared in front of him. It looked like the figure of Xinjia the Great Emperor, yet it also somewhat resembled Futian. It was as though two of them had merged into one figure. "What is this?" mumbled Saint Jinchan. He had a bad feeling about this. With his level, he actually felt a sense of danger at the moment. This was originally impossible, yet he was indeed experiencing it now. Futian actually made him feel a sense of danger. "What do you plan to do?" asked Lord Blubber, as he looked at the silhouette of Futian. His facial expression changed as well. He similarly sensed danger. "I have told you before. Since you don't believe me, I have no choice but to show you personally," Futian answered. Lord Blubber suddenly recalled what Futian had said before this. He revealed a shocked expression as he exclaimed, "Do you plan to destroy the divine body?" This was the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. It was the flesh of a deity. A universe was stored within it. If Futian destroyed it, how frightening would the outcome be? Lord Blubber naturally understood what a divine body consisted of. The destruction brought forth by the explosion of a divine body would be shocking. No wonder he sensed danger. Buzz. Menacing divine light of path obliteration swept out. This divine light of path obliteration was formed from the countless runes. It swept towards all the cultivators present. "Retreat!" ordered Saint Jinchan decisively. His figure traversed the space with a single step, retreating far away. Right now, it was not the time for contemplating. This was a life-or-death situation even for him. "Destroy!" The divine figure appeared hideous and contorted. It also seemed to be experiencing extreme pain. To destroy the divine body, Futian had to push it to the point of self-destructing. The waves of divine light wiped out everything. Everywhere the light passed, everything was destroyed. All paths ceased existing. No power of the great path could withstand it. "Ah!" Screams could be heard. Under the destructive divine light, renhuangs were immediately torn to shreds. They could not resist at all. In an instant, they were eradicated and disintegrated. The destructive divine light expanded outward. The area it enveloped grew larger and larger. The vast space became a domain of path obliteration. The divine light of path obliteration swept out again and again. Right now, Futian was also experiencing tremendous pain. In the sky, a painful roar could be heard. Rumble. A dull thud sounded. The figure of Xinjia the Great Emperor exploded. Right then, divine light radiated out and flooded the space for billions of miles. It became a true domain of path obliteration. All great paths were destroyed. Within the light, Saint Jinchan and Lord Blubber unleashed their full might to defend their figures from this destructive storm. They did not aim to fight against this power, only seeking self-preservation. At the same time, a beam of light shot out from within the destruction, bringing along the figures of Futian and Hua Jiu as it left the world of destruction. It appeared to be the final ray of life. Chapter 2457, The Darkest Hours. A few days later, somewhere high above in Six Desires Heaven, countless cultivators had gathered around. Their attention was fixed on the field ahead. Golden runes were shining above the firmament, endless and infinite. It seemed as if it was a world of runes. This world covered an extensive area, traversing multiple cities within Six Desires Heaven. It was quite a spectacle. The vast majority of the Renhuang in Six Desires Heaven had been attracted to this place and appeared in the surrounding area of this domain world. Their hearts were greatly disturbed as they beheld the sight in front of them. No matter what levels of cultivators they were, when they felt that aura, they could feel their hearts tremble. Although all of them were looking from the outside, none of them dared step inside. The aura within was far too terrifying, like an air of extinction. Each and every rune seemed to contain the power that could destroy the Great Path, making that vast expansive realm an absolute space of path obliteration. There was no other great path that could exist within this space, except for the force of destruction formed by those infinite runes. It was a vacuum for a world. That's too scary. Only death awaits anyone who walks inside. Some top-notch Renhuang mumbled with solemn expressions and extremely uneasy hearts. They couldn't believe such a strange sight like this was actually happening in Six Desires Heaven. And what happened here had spread through gossip, at first. However, as the storm continued and widened, the news was dispersing throughout Six Desires Heaven with incredible speed so that it was known to every cultivator in the entire Six Desires Heaven. This terrifying domain of path obliteration was formed by the explosion of a divine body. A god-level figure's physical body had exploded, exposing its internal world to the outside, creating a world of destruction that traversed endless space to form this domain of path obliteration. "Has anyone witnessed that battle?" someone asked. "Do you think it's possible?" the person next to him responded. "With such destructive power, any witness would surely die upon the destructive power erupting. No one who saw it could live to tell the tale." "That's true." The person who asked the question felt a little stupid, but he still felt it was a pity, such an epic battle with no living witness. A single Renhuang took down the entire Jinshan temple. Not too long ago, Jinshan temple was searching for any traces of Futian in Six Desires Heaven. Who would have thought that it would cause such horrible consequences and end like this? Now, it seems that whether it was Six Desires Heaven or Jinshan temple, they were both plotting to obtain the divine body that was in Futian's possession. Someone else whispered. Well, it's just that no one expected that Futian could actually cause the divine body to explode. That light of destruction illuminated half of all of Six Desires Heaven, which was indescribably horrible. This time, Jinshan Temple suffered a heavy loss. It was really a disaster. Everyone was talking about it, and with complicated emotions. No one could have thought that a Renhuang, rumored to have come from Divine Prefecture, would upset Six Desires Heaven like this. Six Desires Heavenly Palace had been destroyed, and the Renhuang had killed 2 out of the 4 great lords, with 2 more wounded. When Jinshan Temple came to apprehend him, even Saint Jinshan himself had arrived in person. But in the end it was said that almost all the cultivators from Jinshan Temple were wiped out. Any cultivators below the realm of Saint Jinshan were completely obliterated. Even the deputy lord himself had perished under that attack of total annihilation. Another lord-level casualty in that utter disaster. Only Saint Jinshan was able to walk out of there alive. No one knew what Saint Jinshan had experienced in that storm of destruction, but they heard that when some witnesses saw Saint Jinshan emerge from that world of destruction, he was covered in blood, barely alive. That high and mighty saint had almost perished in this disaster. He was lucky that he got out with his life. However, even if one managed to survive this storm, it would be at a great cost. Even an existence such as Saint Jinshan was covered in blood and near death. It was said that when he finally emerged, he had great difficulty levitating into the sky. One could only imagine the severity of his injuries. At present, there were all kinds of rumors circulating in Six Desires Heaven. Some said that Saint Jinshan's body was filled with the scars of the Great Path. Some also said that Saint Jinshan's Great Path foundation had been utterly destroyed. But no matter what, the truth was that Saint Jinshan had lost the battle wretchedly, and it would probably take him a long time to recover. There was probably no way for him to return to his original state in a short time. The news of what happened in Six Desires Heaven even spread to other heavens, especially news that Jinshan Temple had almost been destroyed. This was not just a notable event in Six Desires Heaven but was also of great interest to the entire Western world. Several days later, the divine mountain where Jinshan Temple was located was surrounded by a golden divine light. It radiated with the light of Buddha as if it was a place of cultivation for the great Buddha. Jinshan Temple was the place where Saint Jinshan cultivated. Currently, Jinshan Temple was in a state of chaos. Saint Jinshan took many powerful cultivators from Jinshan Temple with him on his quest, and their deputy lord was also out to capture Futian. So now at this moment, an extremely frightening aura came from the void, shrouded the entire Jinshan Temple. As the divine light lingered, a group of cultivators descended. This was yet another superpower from the Western world. The man in the lead was surrounded by divine light, compelled all the cultivators from Jinshan Temple to bow down to him in worship. The divine consciousnesses of those cultivators swept through and enveloped Jinshan Temple. It antagonized the cultivators from Jinshan Temple. This was an absolutely unthinkable offense that would have never happened before. However, though they were deeply hurt now, they dared not express it, either did they dare to voice their displeasure. They did not yet know whether their lord, Saint Jinshan, was dead or alive. If Saint Jinshan were to meet some unfortunate end, they probably wouldn't fare any better themselves either. "Is the saint not back yet?" the cultivator in the lead asked. His voice reverberated within the entire temple. "No, not yet," someone below answered respectfully. The man nodded and continued, "I have heard what happened at Six Desires Heaven. The saint may be recuperating at the moment. As for Jinshan Temple, in order to avoid interference from outsiders, I will stay here for the time being and wait for the saint to return." Everyone who heard this was speechless, but what the man said was indeed the truth. If the saint had been severely injured, it was possible that he may not return to Jinshan Temple for the time being. After all, within the many years it took for him to cultivate to this level, he had accrued many enemies. So, there was no telling how many adversaries were lying in wait. Normally, no one would dare to do anything out of bounds like this. But if they knew that the saint had been injured severely, it would give some of them ideas. Therefore, the saint might not be able to return in the foreseeable future. However, the presence of these people here was certainly not due to altruism but rather their desire to take over Jinshan Temple. If Saint Jinshan were to return someday, safe and sound, they could say they were here to protect the temple. But if not, then despite knowing the truth, no one dared to refute the man. Ultimately, they could only accept it. Of course. All of them nodded but felt extremely humiliated inside. But what else could they do? This had to be the greatest humiliation that Jinshan Temple had ever suffered in 1,000 years. These truly were the darkest hours for Jinshan Temple. All because of some youngster. Chapter 2458, Convergence. At Six Desires Heaven, on an ordinary mountaintop, was an ancient temple. At this moment, a man in tattered clothing was walking up the stairs outside the ancient temple with heavy footsteps, and he seemed a little tired. The ancient trees on both sides of the stairs swayed gently, covering the steps full of leaves. That figure, climbing up, seemed a little lonesome. As he climbed up, he came to the very top of the staircase, where a monk was sweeping the leaves. When he saw someone came up the stairs, he stopped what he was doing and said to the man while looking at him, "Sir, this temple is not accepting donations or visitors." The man nodded gently as he clasped his hands in front of him and said to the monk, "I passed by here because of chance alone. Or perhaps this was destiny. May I stay in this temple for a while?" The monk put down his brooms and clasped his hands together in return as he bowed to the visitor and replied, "We have rules in our temple that we do not accept donations, so naturally, we cannot receive visitors either. I hope you understand, sir. I am neither a pilgrim nor a visitor. Master must be able to see that I have suffered some serious injuries and require a place to rest for a while. I am here because of Buddha's guidance. May I be so bold as to ask if Master could make an exception and allow me to take refuge at the temple for a while?" The visitor continued to speak. His voice sounded a little pathetic. Who could have imagined that Saint Jinshan, whose name rang throughout the Western world, would be begging like this just to find a place to quietly cultivate and recuperate for a while? Sir, please leave. The monk who was sweeping remained unconvinced. He continued in his effort to get rid of him. Saint Jinchan raised his head to look at the monk. An authoritative gaze appeared in his eyes. Just that gaze alone was enough to make the monk shudder. It was an innate temperament that was difficult to conceal, even if he had been severely injured. But it was only for a moment. All that majesty in his eyes disappeared in the next moment as Saint Jinchan silently turned around and walked down the steps, still looking a bit lonesome. He walked very slowly as if he could not move any faster. Someone walked out from the temple, looking at Saint Jinchan as he was leaving, and asked, "Who was that?" "I don't know." The sweeping monk shook his head. "Looked like someone with nowhere to go. Perhaps he wanted to con his way inside the temple." The person who came out nodded. "There are many people like this. You don't have to be so polite every time." "Very well." That sweeping monk nodded. He still remembered that look in the eyes of Saint Jinchan from before. It was an extremely complicated look and difficult to decipher. However, he was clearly a cripple who exuded no aura of cultivation, so why did he make him feel differently? Saint Jinchan heard the conversation between the two men, and his emotions were extremely turbulent. He never expected that one day he would end up in the situation he was in. But as of now, he dared not disclose his identity to just anyone. He was once the high and mighty lord of Jinshan Temple, but he had his shares of enemies over the years. In addition, many of his cultivators had been killed by Futian on that day, when he caused that destructive power to erupt. If his identity were to be exposed and he was detected by someone with bad intentions, he would die very miserably. Right now, he was almost half disabled. He needed to find a quiet place to recuperate and recover for a period of time. He believed that, in time, with his strength derived from Buddhism, he would be able to get back on his feet, recover from his injuries, and return to his previous state of power. At a moment like this, he vowed he would make Futian so miserable one day that the young man would wish for death. And also, that wife of his. He, Jinchan, had never suffered such humiliation as he did today. Many days later, in the great Brahma heaven of the Western world. In the void, a goddess-like figure traveled through the air. Her face was gorgeous and stunning. She was otherworldly. But at this moment, she was holding a person between her arms. This man was clad in white with white hair, deeply unconscious. However, his handsome visage could still be seen. These two were none other than Huajieyu and Futian. On that day, Futian caused the divine body of Xinjiao the Great Emperor to self-destruct. The resulting terrifying power swept through Six Desires Heaven. The divine body turned into a domain world of annihilation, sitting right above Six Desires Heaven, destroying and slaughtering the cultivators from Jinshan Temple. However, Futian also paid a heavy price in exchange. Even he didn't know what would happen, so he had planned for the worst possible outcome. He had discussed with Huajieyu, and they both agreed that they were willing to face all the consequences. Since they had been forced into this desperate situation, this was all they could do in response. They knew that once they had been taken away, their destiny would no longer be under their own control but would be under the control of the others. After Futian's spiritual soul urged the divine body to explode, he used that last trace of power in the spiritual soul to bring Huajieyu out of that realm of annihilation and escape that corner of the world. Afterward, his spiritual soul returned to his body and fell into a deep slumber. In that world of path obliteration, Huajieyu was almost wiped out as well. This time, the two of them were lucky to get out with their lives. Huajieyu had no expression on her face. She was only concentrating on moving forward. Ahead of her, a group of cultivators was coming towards them. They rode on a golden-winged rock and flew towards them with incredible speed. Mo Yunzi, the golden-winged rock, was connected with Futian psychically and knew the exact location of Futian, which was how he was able to locate them. Seeing their arrival, Huajieyu stopped right away. Blind Tai, Chen Yi, and the others stepped forward to check on Futian's condition. "Teacher." Little Ling and the others' expression was one of slight concern. Yi Futian's condition seemed to be more serious than they had expected. It had been so many days, and he was still in a coma. "Let's find a place to stay first," said Hua Jieyu. Everyone nodded in agreement as they then stepped onto the back of the golden-winged rock. The divine bird spread its wings and started shuttling through the void. "Jinshan Temple had no reason to bully and persecute us like this." Fan Xian looked at Yi Futian and said coldly, "We will have to decimate Jinshan Temple for good." Hua Jieyu watched them in silence. It seemed that they knew all that had happened. As if she heard Hua Jieyu's thoughts, Hua Qingqing continued, "Everything that occurred in Six Desires Heaven caused a great disturbance. It may have already spread across the entire Western world. Here at Great Brahma Heaven, we have also heard a lot of chatter about that battle." Hua Jieyu nodded lightly and asked, "What about Jinshan?" There was some coldness in her voice. If it weren't for Saint Jinshan, who had kept pressing without giving them a way out, Yi Futian would never have had to take that drastic step and end up like this. "I don't know," Hua Qingqing said. "We heard that almost everyone from Jinshan Temple had been wiped out, but so far, it was impossible to determine whether Saint Jinshan himself had actually died. Some reports indicated Saint Jinshan may not yet perish, but he did not return to Jinshan Temple either. Temporarily, he had gone missing. It is possible that even if he did not fall, he might have been severely injured." Hua Jieyu nodded. Under that devastating attack, even if Saint Jinshan did not die from it, he would be so gravely injured that he probably used up 8 out of his 9 lives. His condition could not be much better than Yi Futian's. However, this was not enough. What she really wanted to hear was the news that Saint Jinshan had died. "We are here." It didn't take long for the group to land on an ancient peak. There, they would conceal their trail and avoid attracting unwanted attention. "Let's not bother with things from the outside for now, and let him recover and rest. Let's not go out for a while either," Chini proposed, and everyone agreed. Not long after they arrived in the Western world, they had already set off such a violent storm that shocked everybody within. Chapter 2459 Slumber. After the battle at Six Desires Heaven, nearly all the top figures at Jinshan Temple had been killed or wounded. For the time being, no one bothered chasing down Yi Futian. Previously, Jinshan Temple wanted to apprehend Yi Futian because of the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor and the divine items that were in his possession. However, after that battle, everyone witnessed Yi Futian's resolution. The divine body self-destructed and exploded, turning into an endless domain world of path obliteration. The divine body was no more. Furthermore, it was pointless to continue plotting for the inheritance that Yi Futian had inherited from the great emperors. The determination that Yi Futian displayed made them realize that even if Yi Futian were to be taken, it would be difficult to force him to submit. Therefore, continuing to go after Yi Futian would get them nothing. However, Saint Jinshan was a cultivator of Buddhism who held exceptionally high status in the Western world. If Yi Futian were to really fall into the hands of certain people, it was probably something that would not bother him much. After all, without the divine body, Yi Futian's strength would be greatly limited. He would no longer pose a threat to those who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. At the same time, this battle also introduced those in the Western world to a cultivator from Divine Prefecture. He was a white-haired genius talent who had also caused an uproar in the original realm. However, everything happening in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with Yi Futian at the moment. He had not yet awakened from his deep slumber. Obviously, the trauma he had suffered this time was unprecedented. Even at his current realm and the strength of his spiritual soul could hardly bear the impact he received, so he had been in a deep sleep ever since. Time passed little by little. Although the influence of that battle remained, it was not talked about as much as time went on. However, the rush remained the same in Six Desires Heaven, as cultivators in the Western world were constantly going there. They wanted to bear witness to that domain world of path obliteration created by the self-destruction of the divine body. It had attracted the interest of everyone, especially those cultivators who were mighty and powerful. The divine body self-destructed, forming a domain space of its own. It had actually created an independent space between heaven and earth, which seemed totally incompatible with this place. Furthermore, no one dared to enter it lightly, as their power of the Great Path could be easily wiped out. After feeling the power within the domain of path obliteration, everyone couldn't help but think of Saint Jinshan. In that battle, what kind of terrifying scenario did the cultivators from Jinshan Temple experience? According to rumors, the Lord of Jinshan Temple, Saint Jinshan, did not perish. The news came from Jinshan Temple, so it should be reliable. There was no better entity to judge the well-being of Saint Jinshan than Jinshan Temple. However, he had not gone back to the temple either. Anyone who felt the aura of destruction in this domain understood that even if Saint Jinshan survived, he probably did so at a great cost. He would probably not be returning to Jinshan Temple for the foreseeable future, and would do well to conceal his whereabouts. In the meantime, many cultivators had gone to Jinshan Temple and were openly staying there, waiting. Saint Jinshan aside, Futian was no better than the other man at the moment. Upon the ancient peak, there was a structure at the edge of the cliff. It was extremely quiet, and a beautiful goddess was sitting there silently. Behind her, a white-haired figure laid without movements or sound, but a breath of life could be detected, flowing upon his body. Even though Futian had fallen into a deep sleep, this life force seemed to automatically nourish his body and spiritual soul. Gradually, signs of life slowly appeared on Futian's face. Hua Jiyu clearly remembered that after the battle, Futian had almost fallen into a deadly slumber. Only a mysterious force maintained his weakened vitality, which was associated with Futian's superior ability in self-healing. Hua Jiyu also knew a lot about this and knew how tenacious Futian's life force could be. Therefore, although she was worried, she firmly believed that Futian would eventually get better. He could heal himself, it was only a matter of time. As time passed, in a blink of an eye, it had already been 2 years since Futian and the others arrived in the Western world. Futian had thought that this trip would not have taken them long, but he did not expect that he would still be in a coma 2 years after they arrived in the Western world, not yet ready to wake up. In the courtyard upon the ancient peak, a figure stepped forward. She glanced at the woman in front of her and the figure lying quietly there and whispered, "His aura of life has already returned to its fullness. How come he has not woken yet?" The one who was asking was Hua Qingqing. Hua Jiyu turned her head to glance at Futian. At this time, Futian was completely covered by the aura of life, and there were even currents of the great path that surrounded him. His breath of life had been completely restored, but still, he was deep in his slumber. Shaking her head gently, Hua Jiyu whispered in a low voice, "His breath of life is restored, so he should be fine. Perhaps he was still sleeping because his spiritual soul has not yet fully recovered. Ultimately, it was the power of his spiritual soul that he consumed in that battle. Maybe it is developing in a better direction," Hua Qingqing said softly, and Hua Jiyu nodded. It was possible. Perhaps after such a tremendous consumption of his power, if Futian fully recovered, with his tenacity, he might have gotten stronger. His life spirit had always had an unimaginable resilience that was almost frightening. "How about the young ones? Did they go down the mountain again?" Hua Jiyu asked. The young ones she was referring to included Fang Xiyuan and Little Ling. After settling down here for a while, the 4 of them would often go down the mountain and walk around the city. The influence of that battle waned, and almost no one knew about them, at least not in the great Brahma heaven where they were at. Hua Qingqing nodded. "They are still so young, and it was understandable that they can't stay put like us. The trip they took down the mountain was also for the sake of experience. Wasn't that the original reason for bringing them here? Uncle Tai is with them, so nothing will happen. In this city, Uncle Tai's cultivation is sufficient to keep them safe," Hua Qingqing continued. Hua Jiyu nodded in agreement. The 4 youngsters treated her as their mistress, with respect. They saw her as their own elder, which she could clearly feel. Now the group was like family, and she started seeing those 4 little ones as her own. In fact, all 4 of them were in the realm of Erhuang, so nothing could really happen to them. Therefore, there was no need to worry about them wandering around. Qingqing, it's just that your business is going to be delayed again. Hua Jieyu looked at Hua Qingqing and said. This trip to the Western world was meant for Hua Qingqing, but who knew that they would encounter a series of troubles in Six Desires Heaven? They had no choice in any of them. Now that 2 years had passed, they had no idea how long it would take for them to complete the original objective of this trip. No matter. There was no telling how long my business will take, so it doesn't matter if it's not yet completed. As long as I can stay by your side, it is enough. Hua Qingqing said with a smile, and her smile seemed to put those around her at ease. Since he came to the Western world, this thing must be done, of course. Hua Jieyu responded. She looked at Yi Futian's sleeping figure and whispered. He should be waking up soon too. Chapter 2460, All Buddha's Calendar. Over the past few days, the great Brahma heaven had been inordinately lively. It seemed as if it was in anticipation of something celebratory. Lanterns were hung up by everyone in the city, and all of them had a Buddha lamp lit within the lantern, with the word Buddha engraved on the outside of the lantern. Numerous cultivators from the great Brahma heaven were also visiting places like temples on this day, and the entire great Brahma heaven was filled with a special atmosphere. Gradually, there was less and less talk about the battle that happened 2 years ago in Six Desires Heaven. It was as if another major event was about to occur, which would drown out all the rippling effects of that battle. In a tavern in the great Brahma heaven, many cultivators came and went, drinking and chatting. A group of 4 people was sitting somewhere here. These 4 were very young in age, but their temperaments were extraordinary. It was Yi Futian's 4 disciples. Fan Xiyuan, Little Ling, Tai Tu, and Duo Yu, the 4 of them. They were very quiet at this time. They didn't speak much but were more interested in listening. They were fascinated by the things discussed by the people around them. All Buddha's Fest! Fan Xiyuan's eyes moved around, finding this new subject somewhat interesting. He didn't expect that there would be such a festival in the Western world. And according to their understanding, All Buddha's Fest only happened once every 100 years and sometimes lasted for 100 days. It was in remembrance of the Lord of all Buddhas. Once upon a time, the Lord of all Buddhas was enlightened under the Bodhi tree and started spread his faith in the Western world. He was honored as the Lord of all Buddhas. He traveled all over the Western world to spread Buddhism's teachings and bring light to those living within the world, which contributed to the prosperity of the Western world today. To commemorate the Lord of all Buddhas, subsequently, later generations decided on an All Buddha's Fest, held once every 100 years. During All Buddha's Fest, no cultivators in the Western world were allowed to kill or even fight, as blood was forbidden. At the same time, Buddhists would be traveling to all corners of the Western world during these 100 days, preaching and imparting Buddhist doctrines and teaching people to do good. In other words, during the 100 days of All Buddha's Fest, the endless Western world would enter into a period of absolute peace and become an ideal world. It was without killing, plundering, or conquest. Otherwise, they would be dealt with by Buddhist justice. Moreover, the All Buddha's Fest this time was different from all prior times and would be even grander. This year would not only be ushering in the All Buddha's Fest, which was held once every 100 years, but also the 10,000 years on the All Buddha's calendar. In other words, the end of All Buddha's Fest would be the beginning of the 10,000th year on the All Buddha's calendar. Such scene of prosperity had hardly ever been experienced in anyone's lifetime. Precise because of this, even though the great Brahma heaven was not the center of Buddhism, the atmosphere of joy was thick in the air. Everyone was getting ready to welcome the onset of All Buddha's Fest. All Buddha's Fest is here. What about the thing that Master wanted to do? Little Ling murmured. All killing was prohibited during All Buddha's Fest, so a recurrence of something like what happened before would be absolutely forbidden. As soon as All Buddha's Fest was here, the Master could do what he wanted to do. This was an opportunity. Fan Xiyun thought of it as well. Although they didn't know exactly what the teacher intended to do, they had some general idea of where they needed to be. No doubt, All Buddha's Fest would be a good opportunity. But right now, the Master was still in a slumber and hadn't awakened. If he couldn't make it in time, that could be a problem. What happens if someone breaks the rules during all Buddha's fest? Duo Yu asked. His voice was tinged with a coldness. Many people next to them looked their way when they heard him and looked at Duo Yu as if he was a total idiot. These people seemed to have no idea about the history of Buddhism. Once upon a time, a Buddha lord above the western heaven violated the commandments. Later, he died in the parinirvana, otherwise known as the Great Entrance into Perfect Rest, as a warning to future generations. That Buddha lord at the time was one of the top 10 Buddha lords in western heaven. A cultivator next to him said indifferently, which caused Fang Xiyuan and the others to feel a slight concern. Duo Yu nodded slightly on the side, taking it all in. What if someone was trying to harm me, but I resisted and killed the instigator? Duo Yu continued, wanting to clarify the situation. He sensed that this All Buddha's Fest would be an opportunity for his master. If the master did not wake up, they could assist the masteress to do what the master wanted to accomplish. And this matter seemed to have something to do with the masteress and Hua Qingqing. Not guilty in that case, the person next to him responded. Duo Yu nodded in return. Thank you? He didn't ask anything anymore because now he had some basic understanding of all Buddha's fest rules. Your temperaments are extraordinary. Conceivably, you must be from an exceptional clan. At your level of cultivation, you should have known about these things. Next to them, a fair-looking man in white played with his cup with a smile and said, So, may I ask where are you from? The rest of the people inside the tavern realized this as well. These 4 people had a superior temperament. They definitely were unusual. But the rules of all Buddha's fest were indeed common knowledge, known to all Buddhist cultivators. Even young people would have heard about it. These people didn't seem to know anything, which was very strange. Fang Xiyuan showed alertness in his eyes when he heard the man's question. He thought that this person was pretty sharp. He smiled and replied, The 4 of us have been following our master to cultivate in solitude since we were kids. It wasn't until recently that we have been coming out a little more in the world. It was not so strange that we are unfamiliar about some of the things in the world. And he was not lying. Indeed, they had been cultivating in isolation. In Four Corner Village, they didn't know much about anything. Even the divine prefecture was a strange entity to them, never mind the Buddhist Western world. This is a coincidence then. Previously I was also cultivating with my master away from worldly disturbances and only stepped into the world not long ago myself, precisely because of the arrival of all Buddha's fest. If you have just come to this world, you should have some understanding of the fest and not be completely ignorant of it. Moreover, you seem to be very interested in all Buddha's fest, enough to make inquiries. Could it be that your clan is also unfamiliar with all Buddha's fest? The man in white continued. His face was fair but with a strangely wicked attraction. He appeared to be about 30 years of age but appeared quite unfathomable. Fang Xiyuan and his little group were a little annoyed now. This man's tone was getting to be a little too aggressive. What's it to you? Little Ling replied coldly, but Fang Xiyuan asked instead. Our elders have not mentioned it to us. Presumably, they knew that we would be asking around and didn't think it necessary. Is there a problem with that? The man in white smiled as he took a sip of wine. But then he put down the cup and turned to face them, looking at Fang Xiyuan's table. In an instant, a terrible golden ray gleamed from his eyes, and the light of Buddha was shining. Those eyes of his seemed to be able to see through everything. And this one glance caused the faces of the 4 youngsters to change suddenly. They sensed currents of the great path were flowing all around them, and it was a special kind of great path, their own path of cultivation. Buddha's clairvoyance. The cultivators in the tavern were astounded when they saw the sight before them. The eyes of the man in white seemed to have turned into the eyes of Buddha, capable of seeing through everything. Any cultivator would have nowhere to hide in front of those eyes. It was him. Everyone could think of only one person, and their hearts were uneasy. Chapter 2461, Aggressor. Zhu He was a disciple from the Zhu family, one of the top principalities in Jianan City in the great Brahma heaven. Zhu He had shown unparalleled talent since he was a child and was sent to the holy land of Buddhism to cultivate. He was the only cultivator in Jiannan City to be selected by the Buddhist sect. Although he was not often seen in Jiannan City, the cultivation world of Jiannan City knew him very well. Now, he seemed to have returned. It must be on account of the All Buddhas Fest. All Buddhas Fest was the premier grand event in the Buddhist world. It was not surprising for Zhu Ho to come back home at this time. Indeed, Zhu Ho had completed his cultivation of the Buddha's clairvoyance, which was a most supernatural ability in the world of Buddhism. It enabled its cultivator to see through everything, including the types of cultivation practiced by the others. At this moment, Zhu Ho's heavenly eyes fixed on the 4 cultivators, still surrounded by the light of Buddha. Fang Xiyuan and the other 3 stood up at the same time, looking at Zhu Ho, quite displeased. However, Zhu Ho didn't seem to care. He was still sitting there quietly. It seemed as if he was not aware of any of it. Natural hidden ways, Zhu Ho muttered to himself, still staring at the 4 of them. He continued, Jiannan City is not one of the top cities in the great Brahma heaven for cultivation. It was not surprising that the sudden appearance of 4 cultivators with natural hidden ways piqued my curiosity. What clan are you from, and what is it exactly? Where are the 4 of you coming from? Fang Xiyuan and the others were more than stunned. Zhu Ho's eyes were so sharp and ruthless that he saw the 4 of them were born with the way. They cultivated in the village and were indeed born with the hidden way. Later they received tutelage from the teacher himself in cultivation. It was true they were extraordinary, far beyond those common cultivators. It could be said that the conditions of their cultivation were unparalleled, hence Zhu Ho's realization of just how exceptional they were. Under the Buddha's clairvoyance, he could see that they had natural hidden ways about them. We have to go now, Fang Xiyuan said coldly. As soon as his voice faded, he glanced at the other 3 and turned around to leave. Fang Xiyuan was, by nature, passionate and impulsive. He was prone to mischief in the village when he was younger. Although he was of age now, his personality did not change much. However, now was not the time to do anything stupid, and the last thing he wanted was to provoke someone and cause more trouble for his master. The others understood and followed Fang Xiyuan to leave. However, an aura of the Great Path fell directly on them, as several Renhuang intercepted them in different directions and sealed the tavern shut. Zhu Ho sat there quietly. He continued to drink his cup of wine. His manner was light and breezy. Fang Xiyuan turned to look at him and said, We don't know each other, so there is no need to act like this. But I am interested in the 4 of you. Zhu Ho responded. He stood up and walked toward the 4 of them. The 4 of you know nothing of All Buddha's Fest, yet you were born with natural hidden ways, each with different abilities with independent elements that may not come from the same discipline. I assure you, I am quite curious about the 4 of you. Outside the tavern, a blind man was working his way in the direction of the tavern from a distance. It was Blind Tai, of course. But at this moment, there was another middle-aged man who emerged in front of him. This middle-aged man exuded a horrific aura as the currents of the Great Path continuously flowed all over his body. He was watching Blind Tai with extreme alarm, but his realm was about the same as his opponent, the pinnacle of Renhuang. He got in front of Blind Tai. Obviously, he was the cultivator who was secretly protecting Zhu Ho, just like Blind Tai was keeping Fang Xiyuan and the other 3 youngsters out of trouble. Fang Xiyuan and the others knew that Blind Tai had been intercepted. Clearly, the identity of this man in white was more than meets the eye. What do you want to do? Fang Xiyuan turned his head and asked the man in white. I don't want to do anything. It is purely out of curiosity that I want to see who you are and where you come from. The man in white stood up, inspecting the 4 with those heavenly eyes. An invisible storm of the Great Path blew up in the tavern. Instantly, everything in the tavern was shattered into nothingness. The cultivators inside evacuated quickly to get out of their way. Soon, the only ones left were the man in white and the cultivators behind him, as well as Fang Xiyuan and his companions. Fang Xiyuan and the others had a displeased look on their faces. Just for pure curiosity? This didn't make any sense. With the onset of All Buddha's Fest, the world of Buddhism would usher in a period of absolute peace. Even those cultivators with long-standing grievances would not be able to act for quite a while. Therefore, right before all Buddha's fest, the world of Buddhism would often experience a period of chaos, with many people hasten to resolve disputes or to act capriciously. Once all Buddha's fest arrived, there would be a long period of time for things to settle down. As for Shu Ho, he was beyond certain that these four were no cultivators from Jianan City. It was rare to see four great cultivators who were born with a natural hidden way. It was natural for him to want to take a closer look. When Buddha's clairvoyance was released, his eyes suddenly became more petrifying. He seemed to see through everything, and once again, his eyes were directed at the four of them. When these eyes locked onto theirs, Fang Xiyuan and his companions felt a prickly pain in their own eyes, as if the heavenly eyes had pierced their eyes, to penetrate their consciousnesses to spy on their cultivation. Boom! The four exploded with the power of the Great Path at the same time. Their bodies levitated into the air with force. Shu Ho was too audacious, blatantly spying on them without reservation. Naturally, they could not sit here and waiting for him to pick them off. I saw divine methods. You have the inheritance of the great emperor hidden on you. Shu Ho's eyes were particularly frightening. Just now, he seemed to have seen some imageries in his mind, and just as he had thought, these four youths had unusual origins. At this moment, Shu Ho's eyes were growing solemn. His body slowly elevated into the air, and his white robes fluttered as his eyes fixed on the four. Divine light radiated out of those terrifying eyes again, looking at Fang Xiyuan and his companions. Boom! At this time, in the distant space, a great war suddenly erupted. It was Blind Tai who acted. Although he couldn't see, he couldn't be more clear about everything that was happening around him. Shu Ho's realm was considerable. He was a cultivator in the realm of Middle Renhuang. Fang Xiyuan and the others wouldn't be able to counter him effectively. More importantly, the ability that Shu Ho cultivate was dangerous and mystifying. He possessed the Buddhist method of Buddha's clairvoyance, so he could spy on everything and enter their consciousnesses. If he was allowed to succeed, it would be too detrimental to the four youngsters and may have an unfortunate effect on their future cultivation. However, the strength of the cultivator who blocked Blind Tai's attack was also menacingly tyrannical. He was a cultivator from Shu Ho's clan, an expert in many Buddhist methods, with amazing defensive power. He was able to intercept Blind Tai's attack outright so that Blind Tai was unable to break through his defense to help Fang Xiyuan and the others. Shu Ho did not look over there. He was suspended in midair, continued to regard at the four. A pair of gigantic eyes suddenly appeared in the void, shutting down this corner of the sky immediately, and turning it into a world of pupil, just as if the world now was the heavenly eye itself. These gigantic eyes that appeared in the void looked at Fang Xiyuan and his group. Suddenly, the auras of the Great Path upon the four of them were completely exposed. Elusive currents of the Great Path now turned into shadows and were revealed. A miniature world appeared around Fang Xiyuan. Doors of space appeared around Little Ling. A divine shadow holding a divine hammer stood behind Tai Tu, and a pair of horrific eyes of reincarnation appeared behind Duo Yu. Chapter 2462, Waking Up. Shu Ho had a satisfying look in his eyes when he saw the images before him. He said in a low voice, "It's truly incredible. Tell me now who's your master and where you are from." Buzz! Fang Xiyuan's figure was gone in a flicker. Spatial divine lights appeared in the void, approaching Shu Ho with all due speed. However, even those spatial lights, nearly invisible, could not escape the heavenly eyes, which saw everything with ultra-clarity. Fang Xiyuan's every movement seemed to be magnified and in slow motion. None of them had escaped Shu Ho's awareness. Shu Ho raised his hand, and a massive golden Buddhist palm seal blasted out, passing through those spatial divine lights. It landed on Fang Xiyuan with precision. A deafening bang was heard as the attack came through in front of Fang Xiyuan. The palm seal penetrated the protective shield around Fang Xiyuan, seeping inside the miniature world. It then slammed on Fang Xiyuan directly. The momentum knocked Fang Xiyuan back a few steps. The light was shining brightly in the space. Fang Xiyuan returned directly to the place he was before. He made a muffled groan. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. The power of space seemed to be completely futile under the heavenly eyes, as nothing could be hidden. More importantly, their opponent had the advantage of a much higher realm, a gap that was impossible to rectify. It was simply inconceivable for Futian to get any closer and injure his opponent under these circumstances. As a result, he was repelled readily enough by a single blow. Zhu Ho's gaze fell on Futian, and a hint of excitement flashed across his eyes. Those born with the natural hidden ways are truly full of surprises. The body is the body of the great path, indescribably elusive. It was difficult to capture were it not for the Buddha's clairvoyance. He was fascinated by the abilities of these people. Duoyu took a step forward. Those eyes of his were extremely frightening. These were the eyes of reincarnation. Zhu Ho seemed to detect it quickly, though. Under the Buddha's clairvoyance, those massive eyes in the void fixed on Duoyu, looking through the illusions he was creating. Unfortunately, hallucinations and the eye of reincarnation are quite useless here. Zhu Ho's eyes were strange and wicked-looking. If the young man in front of him possessed equal cultivation as him, perhaps the eye of reincarnation could be of threat to him, but the gap was simply too great to pose any threat. Duoyu felt a sharp pain in his eyes. As he disengaged the eye of reincarnation, he shut both eyes tightly. Little Ling and Tai Tu still attempted to make a move, but Futian held them back with his hand. He looked at Zhu Ho and said, "Why are you so unrelenting?" But Zhu Ho didn't much care about Futian's objection nor his inquiry, for that matter. His body was suspended in the sky, surveying the land below, as that pair of heavenly eyes still floated in midair. They turned this space into a sorcery zone. "If you refuse to provide an explanation yourself, you leave me no choice," said Zhu Ho. He then stretched out his hand and grabbed at Futian and the other three. A massive and boundless Buddhist palm seal smashed down at them, grabbed towards Little Ling first. Doors of space appeared all around Little Ling. She walked into one as her figure disappeared right where she was, but none of this escaped the heavenly eyes floating above them. A gigantic palm seal cupped in another direction, and just as Little Ling was walking out of another door of space, she walked right into the palm. It grabbed her and took her high up into the sky. "Little Ling!" The expression of the other three changed quickly to panic. Tai Tu was on the move first. But then a terrifying divine shadow appeared behind him, holding the divine hammer of the protector and blasting it down, rocking this corner of the sky. A terrifying boom sound came out as the divine hammer of the protector sought to destroy this space and take aim at Zhu Ho. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," Zhu Ho remarked with much contempt. Likewise, a boundless and humongous figure also appeared behind him. An ancient Buddha in white, who now raised his hand to blast out a golden palm seal, smashed right on the hammer that was falling on him. The rumbling sound of pure trepidation came out as the space was shaking in its aftershocks. The divine hammer of the protector failed to do anything to the giant palm seal from the ancient Buddha in white. "Go!" Zhu Ho spat forcefully, and suddenly there was a violent roar in the void. Many gigantic palm seals were now blasting out like endless waves of a tsunami. They overwhelmed the void, knocked the hammer back, then slammed right on Tai Tu with decided ferocity. As Tai Tu's body flew back with fierce backward momentum, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Futian and Duoyu also released their expertise in successive attacks, but Zhu Ho took absolutely no notice. With a wave of his hand, thousands of Buddhist palm seals blasted out, sheltering the sky and cleared out all the space. In a blink of an eye, all three of them were injured in that powerful attack and forced to retreat. Faced with absolute realm advantage, Futian and his companions had no way of asserting the true scope of their strengths. Whether they were born with natural hidden ways, cultivated in divine methods, or instructed by deities, none made any difference. The gap between their realms was irreparable. In this great path domain, fierce roars of battle cries could be heard as the battles raged on. Blind Tai desperately fought to gain any grounds forward, wanting to break through the defense that was hampering him so that he could render support to those youngsters. His divine consciousness penetrated the great path domain formed by the heavenly eyes and scanned inside. It was as if he could see everything that was happening. Iya! At this moment, a long, sustained whistle was heard. It was the sound uttered by some demonic beast. Blind Tai's divine consciousness went to that side and perceived the golden divine light that broke through the clouds and mist in the sky behind them. It was the golden-winged roc, and several figures were riding on the back of the roc. The man in the lead was clad in pure white with white hair, unparalleled beyond words. Sensing this, Blind Tai retracted much of his aura. Finally, he woke up. Now that he was here, the situation at hand would be resolved in no time. The golden-winged roc swooped down as a golden light broke through the space, aiming directly at that area of the great path. With a loud bang, that area of the great path was penetrated through and split wide open, suddenly exposing the battlefield within. Shu Ho muffled a groan as his body was repelled back involuntarily. The expression on his face changed slightly as he looked at the huge divine bird that appeared and the figures that were standing on the back of the divine bird. Master! Fang Xian and Tai Tu's eyes lit up when they saw the figure on the back of the divine bird. Their master had finally woken up from his slumber and come to their rescue just in time. Master? Zhu Ho looked at the figure on the back of the divine bird, frowning slightly, and a touch of coldness instantly flashed through his eyes. A cultivator walked out from behind him and got in front of Zhu Ho, who still had little Ling in his clutches. He was worried that the other party would suddenly unleash fatal attacks on Zhu Ho. Buzz! A light suddenly lit up on the back of the divine bird, and bright light instantly illuminated all over this space. Many had to close their eyes immediately because the light was so blinding that they could see nothing but the light. Under this light, there was a sound that came out, and Zhu Ho's expression suddenly changed. When the light disappeared, the humongous palm seal was shattered and fell from the sky, and the figure that he was holding had been brought back to the back of the divine bird already. The method of light. There was slight disbelief in Zhu Ho's eyes. These cultivators were far too mysterious. The four youngsters were all born with a natural hidden way, and now there was someone who was an expert at the method of light. Who were these people? And where did they come from? Thank you, Uncle Chen. Little Ling looked at the people on the rock and whispered, Master, Masteress. As she was speaking, she kept her head bowed slightly as if she had done something wrong. She had caused this trouble for the master. Little Ling, are you okay? Yi Futian said softly, with some indulgence. Little Ling shook her head, and when Yi Futian saw her reaction, he knew what she was worried about. As long as you are okay. Yi Futian smiled and rubbed her head. He then turned his attention to Zhu Ho as his eyes fell on him. Zhu Ho's heart shuddered when he saw those eyes, as he immediately sensed a strong danger lurking. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.